Tonight, we explore a different outcome for the Battle of the Blackwater, a world where the wildfire chain held, where Tyrion's defenses bought ours but not victory, and where Stannis Baratheon's fleet broke through to the shore before the Lion Gate could close. Stripped of the moment that might have turned his tide, Joffrey's court would watch the Baratheon fleet breach the harbour, and the most relentless man in Westeros come to claim what was rightfully his. His victory would cost him more than the battle. It would cost him the city's soul, his closest advisor's loyalty, and the fragile alliances that made a kingdom possible. But survival would change everything. Joffrey's fate, Cersei's hold on power, the Tyrell marriage, and the war that Robb Stark was still fighting in the north. This is the story of what might have happened if Stannis Baratheon won the Battle of the Blackwater. The Blackwater, the moment that changed. In the version everyone knows, the trumpet sounds. The Lannister cavalry, Tywin's force, Mace Tyrell's force, the combined weight of every sword that Cersei's gold had bought, or Littlefinger's promises had secured, comes through the King's Gate at the exact moment Stannis' men have scaled the walls. The song changes. The wildfire was the act. The cavalry is the ending. In this version, the gate is late. Not by much. A quarter hour. The specific logistical failure of a force moving faster than its communication, the column outrunning its own messengers in the dark of a Crownlands night, and the King's Gate guards, who had been told wait for the signal, waiting for a signal that arrived too late, because the man carrying it took a crossbow bolt in the Kingswood and died in a ditch with the message still tucked in his doublet. A quarter hour. Stannis' men were on the walls when the horn sounded, not the first walls, the river walls. The waterside defences that had been burning and breaking since the wildfire bloom lit the bay. The inner walls, the walls that overlooked the city, the walls that once taken, meant the city was taken. Sir Imry Florent was dead. Half the fleet was ash and wreckage in the bay, the wildfire still burning on the water with the specific, impossible persistence of magical fire that didn't require fuel and that would burn until it decided not to. Stannis had lost thousands of men on the water, hundreds more on the shore. The assault had been catastrophic in the way that direct assaults on fortified positions were always catastrophic, costly, grinding, the meat grinder arithmetic of men throwing themselves at prepared defences and dying in sufficient quantity that eventually the defences ran out of things to throw back. But the defences had run out. Tyrion had built them well, the chain, the wildfire, the manning of the walls, the specific defensive architecture of a man who understood that the city couldn't hold forever, but could hold long enough. Long enough was supposed to mean until the cavalry arrived. Until Tywin came through the gate, and Stannis' men, exhausted and still fighting in two directions, broke. Long enough failed by a quarter hour. Stannis came ashore at the Mudgate. He came at the front of his men, which was either leadership or recklessness, or the specific Stannis quality that combined both. The bone-deep belief that a king led from the front because the alternative was claiming a title for its benefits while leaving the cost to others. And Stannis Baratheon did not claim titles for their benefits. He claimed them because they were his by right, and the right required payment in blood. And he was willing to pay. He was bleeding when he came through the gate. Not badly. A sword cut on his left arm, through the gap in his armour that a Lannister guardsman had found in the fighting on the Mudgate steps. The cut was binding blood, but not stopping it. Stannis had not looked at it. Stannis was looking at the city. King's Landing. He had not been inside it since he'd served on Robert's small council, since the years of being underused and unappreciated and managed around the specific political marginalization that Robert had applied to his more competent brother, because competence in proximity was uncomfortable, and Robert preferred his comforts. He had not missed it. King's Landing smelled like a city that had been burning, the wildfire fumes, acrid and otherworldly, mixing with the older smells of smoke and fear and the specific human catastrophe of a city that had just had half a fleet's worth of wildfire detonate in its harbour. He stood in the gate. He looked at the city. He said, "Find me Davos." The words that came back were not what he wanted. Sir Davos was in the water. His ship, his son's ship, had caught the wildfire bloom that rolled through the fleet after the chain held and the barrels detonated. Davos was alive. they thought. The men were looking. Stannis looked at his master of ships' empty place at his side and felt the specific cold of a man receiving bad news and processing it without the ability to react to it, because reacting required time, and the city in front of him required attention. "Find Melisandre," he said. She was there. She was always there. The Red Woman, the shadow behind every fire for the past year, the advisor who had replaced Davos in the operational calculus, the same way fire replaced stone. More dramatic, less reliable, but utterly committed to the specific cause of Stannis Baratheon's kingship in a way that owed nothing to the man's virtues and everything to the Lord of Light's agenda. She came. "The city is yours," she said. Her accent was still the East, still Ashai, still the specific linguistic signature of a woman from a place so far away that the distances were measured in years rather than miles. "The Lord of Light delivered it. The city is mine because my men bled for it. The Lord of Light can take credit after the billing." She did not respond to this. She never responded to it. Stannis and Melisandre had been having this argument for a year, and the argument had the quality of a ritual. He resisted. She absorbed the resistance without changing, and the net result was that her influence expanded, while his objection was noted and filed. Stannis walked into King's Landing. The fighting was not over. It would not be over for hours. The residual engagements, the Lannister holdouts in the holdfast, the gold cloaks who had been fighting for whoever paid them, and who were now recalculating who that was going to be going forward. Stannis walked into the fighting with the specific momentum of a man who had been waiting for this for 18 months, and who was not going to stop moving now that the stopping would have been possible. They found Joffrey in the throne room. Not on the throne. Cersei had pulled him off the throne and gotten him away from the battle with the specific maternal ferocity that Cersei applied to her children whenever her children's safety overrode her political calculation. The throne room was empty when Stannis' men entered it. The Iron Throne stood in the torchlight, ugly, uncomfortable, 3,000 swords hammered into something that could not be sat in without hurting, and that was, in Stannis' opinion, the most accurate political metaphor in the Seven Kingdoms. He sat in it anyway. Not comfortably. The armrests cut into his hands through his gauntlets. He had not removed the gauntlets because the cut on his arm had soaked through the bandage, and the gauntlets were keeping pressure on the bandage, and there were more important things to do than manage a wound. He sat on the Iron Throne. He was king. He had been king for 18 months, since the day he declared Joffrey a bastard and himself the rightful heir. And in those 18 months, the declaration had been exactly that. A declaration. Words. A claim. The specific gap between legal right and physical reality that had defined his entire rule. The gap was closed. He was king. He sat with the throne's edges cutting into him, and the city burning outside the windows, and Melisandre glowing somewhere behind him, and the sound of fighting still in the streets, and he thought, now comes the hard part. He was right. The battle was the easy part. Cersei, the Red Keep, the hours before capture. Cersei had a bottle of essence of nightshade. She had taken it from the Grand Maester's stores a week before the battle, when the reports from the scouts made it clear that Stannis' fleet was coming, and that the specific size of the fleet made defense possible, but victory uncertain. She had taken it and kept it, and told herself she would not need it. Now she sat in the holdfast with the bottle in her hand, and Joffrey beside her, and Tommen asleep on a cot, and the sound of Stannis' men in the outer yard growing steadily louder. Joffrey was not afraid. This was the thing about Joffrey, the quality that was either courage or the absence of imagination. He was not afraid in the way that fear was usually fear. He was angry, the specific Joffrey anger that was not the anger of a man who understood consequences, but the anger of a boy whose toys had been taken, directed at everyone in the room and the world beyond it. We should fight. There's nobody left to fight with. Joffrey, the Kingsguard, 3 of them are dead. Sir Meryn is outside somewhere. Sandor Clegane. She stopped. The Hound had left. He'd found her in this room 4 hours ago, drunk and done, offering her his sword for the road in the tone of a man who had already decided to use it for himself instead. Cowards. All of them. When father arrives, your grandfather may not arrive in time. Cersei looked at her son, at the face that was Jaime's face, and that wore Joffrey's expression, and that had been the specific cost of the choice she'd made 15 years ago, and the source of the specific pride and the specific terror that had defined every year since. Joffrey, listen to me. If Stannis takes the holdfast, he won't. If he does, she held his gaze. The maternal authority, the concentrated force of a mother who was about to say something that her son was not going to want to hear, and who was going to say it anyway, because the hearing was survival. You must not fight. You must not threaten. You are the king, and kings can be ransomed and exchanged and negotiated. You are worth more to Stannis alive than dead. She paused. As long as you behave as though you are, he'll execute me. Not if you surrender properly. Not if you give him the surrender he wants, the public acknowledgement, the yielding, the specific performance of submission that lets him declare the war over. She set down the bottle. The nightshade would keep. She might still need it, but not yet. Not while this calculation remained open. Stannis Baratheon is a man of law. He wants the throne to be legal. He wants the succession to be clean. Executing the surrendered king's son is not clean. It's murder. Stannis doesn't like murder. He murdered shadow babies. Renly's shadow, Joffrey. Her voice stopped him. If he comes through that door, you will kneel. You will call him your grace. You will say whatever he requires you to say. And when we are through this, when your grandfather arrives and the political ground has shifted, we will find another way. Joffrey looked at his mother. He looked at her the way Joffrey looked at people when the performance of contempt was operating at lower capacity than usual, when something was getting through. He was 13. He was frightened, underneath the anger, in the deep place where the real Joffrey lived when the performance wasn't running. He'll take everything. He'll take the throne. That's not everything. She stood, put the bottle away. We survived this. Joffrey surviving is the whole job right now. The door came down 40 minutes later. Stannis' men came through it, 6 of them, armored, moving with the specific efficient purpose of soldiers who had been given an objective, and who were executing the objective without the dramatic flair that the situation's theatrical potential might otherwise have invited. Stannis came 7th. He looked at Cersei. He looked at Joffrey. He looked at Tommen on the cot, still sleeping. The boy could sleep through anything. Tommen, the specific gift of a child without the nervous system that crisis required. He said, "The fighting is over. The city has fallen. I am king." Cersei said nothing. Joffrey said, "Your grace." The words cost him more than the battle had cost Stannis. Cersei could see it, the physical effort of producing those 2 words from a boy for whom submission was physiologically foreign. He produced them, barely, with the specific grinding reluctance of a rusty gate. Stannis looked at Joffrey. His face was not triumphant, not even satisfied. Stannis' face when he entered the holdfast was the face of a man who had been carrying a very heavy load for 18 months, and who had put the load down, and who was discovering that the absence of the load was not relief, but the revelation of all the soreness that the carrying had been obscuring. "You'll be kept here," Stannis said, to Cersei, to Joffrey, to the sleeping boy. "In the Red Keep, under guard. You'll be treated as befitting your birth, not your claims. The claims are settled." He left. Cersei sat down. She picked up the nightshade bottle again. She set it down again. Not yet. Davos. What the water gave back. Davos Seaworth woke on a rock. The rock was in the bay, one of the small formations that the charts didn't bother naming, because they were too small to be navigable hazards, and too large to be ignored by a man clinging to one in the dark. The wildfire had gone out, most of it. The specific smell of it lingered. The green, the chemical, the wrong. Davos knew the smell of burning ships. He'd been burning ships his whole life, one way or another. This was different. This smelled like the kind of fire that came from before the world knew what fire was. He was missing the first joint of 4 fingers on his right hand. Not recently missing. He'd been missing them for years. Cut off by Stannis as punishment for the smuggling. Kept in a pouch around his neck as reminder and talisman, and the specific Davos solution to the problem of a man who honored you and punished you for the same act. The fingers were still there. What was new was the missing of his son. Mathos. He didn't see him anywhere on the rock or in the water around the rock, or in any of the wreckage that floated past in the grey pre-dawn. The absence it was not something Davos had words for yet. The absence was the kind that sat in the chest where the words hadn't reached it yet, and that was going to hurt more when the words arrived. He found a plank, paddled to shore. He came ashore south of the Mudgate, in the part of the city that was not burning. He came ashore, and he sat on the riverbank, and he looked at the city, and the city was his king's. The gold dragon banners that had been on every tower were coming down. The replacements going up were the Baratheon stag, the crowned and black, the Stannis version of the family sigil that was different from Robert's version, the same way the brothers were different. Same bones, different everything that went on the bones. Davos sat on the bank and felt the absence in his chest and waited for the words to arrive. They arrived with the name Mathos, his boy, his serious, faithful, pious boy, who had kept Davos's logbooks and corrected Davos's spelling, and read from the sacred texts of the Lord of Light with the fervent attention of a young man who had found faith, and who had no idea that faith didn't protect you from wildfire. Davos sat on the bank and wept, not loudly, not with the theatrical grief of songs, the quiet kind, the kind that happened when a man ran out of things to hold the grief back and just let it come, in the dark, before anyone could see. Then he stood. He stood because the man who had brought the fleet to this battle was the man who needed to be told about its cost, and Davos had been delivering inconvenient news to Stannis Baratheon for 15 years, and he was not going to stop because the news had gotten personal. He went to find the king. Stannis. The morning after, governance begins. He convened the small council at dawn. Not the old small council. Those men were either fled, dead, or confined in the Red Keep's various rooms, depending on their specific combination of usefulness and danger. He convened the people he had. Melisandre, Sir Rolland's Storm, who commanded his remaining cavalry. Lady Selyse's cousin, who had been serving as his steward. Maester Jerne from the fleet, the remnant of the administrative body that had sailed with him from Dragonstone. The table was wrong. The small council chamber was built for the small council, the hand seat, the master of coin seat, the master of laws, the grand maester. And the people sitting in it were not the seat's intended occupants, and the wrongness was visible in the way they sat, cautiously. The way people sat in chairs that belonged to someone else, and who were aware that the belonging might reassert itself. The city is mine, Stannis said. He was standing. He did not sit in the small council chamber because sitting in the chairs of the offices he had not yet filled would have been the wrong kind of symbolic claim. He stood at the head of the table and looked at the people assembled, and they looked back with the expressions of men and women who had won and who did not entirely know what to do with the winning. The city is mine, and it needs governing. Today, not next week. Not when I found the right people for the right positions. Today, because a city of 500,000 people does not pause its needs, because the governance has changed. Maester Jerne had a list. Lists were what the Dragonstone Maester produced when confronted with crises. The specific intellectual coping mechanism of a man who had spent 40 years converting problems into line items. Food stocks, Jerne said. The city has 3 weeks of grain in the granaries. The Lannister supply lines from the Westerlands are severed. Obviously, the Tyrells were supplying grain through the Gold Road. That supply line is now also obviously severed. Stannis looked at the Maester. Tell me what we have, not what we've lost. I know what we've lost. 3 weeks. Perhaps 4 if we institute rationing. Jerne wrote something. The sound of quill on parchment was, in the small council chamber at dawn with the city still smoking outside, oddly comforting. Something was being documented. Something was being turned into a line item. The problem was being converted from chaos into administration. The gold cloaks, Sir Rolland said. He was a large man. Not Robert large, but substantial. The build of a career soldier who had maintained the career soldier's physical requirements. He spoke in the flat Stormman's accent that Stannis had grown up hearing. Half of them switched sides before we were through the gate. The other half are now working for me, Stannis said. Or they're not. The ones who are, I'll keep them as city watch. The ones who aren't, they'll be dealt with through the law. The law being, treason carries 1 sentence. I'm aware it will create problems. A city watch that has just watched the last watch tried for treason is going to be cautious about its enforcement. I'll manage cautious. I won't manage disloyal. Roland nodded. He had the expression of a man who found Stannis' absolute clarity about law both admirable and alarming in roughly equal measure, and who had learned that expressing this balance was not productive. Melisandre was at the far end of the table. She had not spoken. She was looking at a candle, not performing the looking, not theatrically communing with her god in a way that might have served as propaganda. She was genuinely looking at the candle. The flame. Whatever the flame showed her when she looked at it with a specific trained attention that was either prophecy or the practiced art of a woman who had learned to perform prophecy so thoroughly she could no longer distinguish it from the real thing. The prisoners, Stannis said. Joffrey, the queen, the other children. Tommen, Jern said. And Princess Myrcella is in Dorne. I know where Myrcella is. Joffrey, the queen. Tommen, what's to be done with them? This was the question. The one that the room had been waiting for since they sat down. The question that was both legal and political and human and that had no clean answer. Joffrey is a bastard, Stannis said. I've said this since he was crowned. The evidence, Jon Arryn died finding it. Ned Stark died finding it. The evidence is sufficient for any honest court. He's not the king's son. He has no claim. He is Cersei Lannister's bastard by her brother, and that is what he is. A trial, Roland said. You're saying trial. I'm saying trial. Public. Evidence presented. Verdict rendered by 7 judges of appropriate standing. Stannis looked at the table. The realm needs to see the process. If I execute Joffrey without a trial, every lord in the 7 kingdoms will say I killed a king. If the trial produces a verdict, the verdict will produce a different problem. Melisandre said. Her first contribution of the morning. Her voice was the voice she used when she wasn't performing. Lower, flatter, less theatrical. The city will see a 13-year-old boy on trial. The city will feel something about that. Cities have feelings. Cities have food lines and crime rates and city watches. The feelings are a secondary concern. The feelings are the primary concern. You've won the battle, Your Grace. The war is not battles. The war is whether the lords will accept you. Whether the city will accept you. Whether the realm will accept you. A 13-year-old boy on trial for his parentage is not clean. It is legally correct. It is not politically clean. Stannis looked at her. The room was quiet with the specific quiet that happened when Stannis and Melisandre were at odds, not arguing, because Stannis didn't argue with her in council. The specific dynamic of a man who was influenced by a person he didn't trust, and who managed the influence by pretending not to be influenced. Keep him confined, Stannis said. The trial will happen. The timing will be considered. Melisandre said nothing, which meant she was satisfied with this outcome. Which meant the outcome served her purposes. Which meant Stannis had agreed to something whose full implications he hadn't traced. He knew this. He accepted it, because the alternative was taking a position on the timing of a child's treason trial at dawn after a battle, and he had more urgent things. Send ravens, Stannis said, to every lord paramount. The city has fallen. The throne is mine. I require their oaths of fealty within the month. Lords who submit will retain their lands and titles. Lords who do not will be treated as rebels. Tywin Lannister, Roland began, will be the first to submit, or the first I deal with. Stannis' voice was flat. He is 2 days' march away with an army. He knows the city has fallen. He will calculate whether attacking a king in possession of King's Landing is worth the cost. He will conclude that it is not. Tywin Lannister is ruthless, but he is not reckless. He will negotiate. You're certain? No, I'm never certain, but I'm right. He looked at the table. Is there anything else before I go find my master of ship's body? The room was silent. Good. He walked to the door, stopped, did not turn around. And someone clean the throne room. It smells like fear. I will not receive lords in a room that smells like fear. He left. Davos and Stannis. The finding, they found each other in the yard. Not planned, Stannis was crossing the yard to the outer walls, and Davos was being escorted in through the main gate by a pair of Stannis' soldiers who had found him on the riverbank and recognized him, and who had brought him in with the specific soldiers' courtesy of men who had been serving with someone for years, and who were delivering him to his destination while being careful with him, because something about his state communicated fragility. Stannis stopped when he saw Davos. Davos stopped when he saw Stannis. The two men looked at each other across 40 feet of yard. Stannis' arm was in a sling now. Someone had dealt with the cut, properly this time, bound tight. The arm immobilized the way cut arms were supposed to be immobilized when the cut was deep enough to matter. His face was the Stannis face, the one that gave nothing away. The specific mask that Davos had been reading for 15 years, and that he could read. Davos's face was not masked. Davos had not yet found the mask. Stannis crossed the yard. He stopped in front of Davos and looked at him with the specific Stannis assessment that was not always sympathetic, but was always honest. The looking that said, "I see what you are. I see what condition you are in. I am not going to pretend otherwise." "Mathos," Stannis said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Davos said. Stannis did not say, "I'm sorry." Stannis and sorry had a complicated relationship that had to do with the way Stannis understood accountability. Sorry implied agency, implied causation. And Stannis was not entirely sure whether the causation landed on him, on the decision to attack, on the Lord of Light's inexplicable failure to protect a faithful man's faithful son, on the wildfire, on the chain, on the specific chain of contingency that had put Mathos Seaworth on that ship at that moment. He was working through the causation. The working took more than a moment. What he said was, he was a good man. He was a good boy. Davos's voice, the flat, flea-bottom accent that surfaced when the performance of acquired courtliness fell away. He was 23. That's a good boy, not a good man. He didn't get to be a man. No. "We won," Davos said, not with triumph, with the specific flat register of someone reporting a fact that they haven't yet reconciled with the facts immediately preceding it. "We won." He didn't get to see it. No, he didn't. The yard around them, soldiers moving, horses being managed, the administrative noise of a captured city being processed into a functioning one. None of it was paying attention to this conversation, and the not paying attention was itself a kind of privacy. The king and his advisor in a yard, speaking quietly. The conversation happening in the space that military protocol left around grief, because military protocol understood that grief was operational and needed space. "I need you," Stannis said. It came out, not the way he intended, probably. It came out stripped of the usual Stannis layer of authority and expectation, with more of the actual underneath than he typically allowed visible. The city, the lords, the politics of what comes next. "I need you." Davos looked at him. "I know," Davos said. "I'll be there." The boy is dead. The work isn't. Davos wiped his face with the back of his hand. "That's what you'd say to me if I was saying it to you." "It is," Stannis said. "So I'll save you the saying." Davos looked at the red keep behind Stannis, at the towers, the battlements, the highest point of the most powerful city in the world. "Is she still alive? The red woman? Melisandre?" "Yes. I want to talk to her." Stannis looked at him. The Stannis assessment. Something in the assessment was cautious. The reading of a man who knew Davos well enough to know what want to talk to her meant in this specific context, following this specific event. "I'll arrange it. Not with you present." "Davos, there are things I want to say to her that you shouldn't have to hear. Not because they're wrong, because the hearing would put you in an impossible position. The yard, the noise, the city going on around the specific compressed negotiation of two men who had been operating in the space between service and friendship for 15 years, and who were negotiating the terms of the next stage." "I'll arrange it," Stannis said. Tyrion, the dungeon, the calculation. Tyrion Lannister woke up in the dungeon with half his face bandaged and the specific throbbing clarity of a man who had been in surgery and whose body was currently processing its feelings about surgery. He remembered the battle, the wildfire, his plan, the specific tactical geometry that had seemed so brilliant in theory and that had been so brutally tested by a fleet that was large enough to absorb the losses and keep coming. He remembered the chain holding, and then the barrels detonating, and then the second wave coming through, and then a sword, and then Mandan Moore, his own Kingsguard, Cersei's man, the specific assassination embedded in his own protection, and then dark. The bandage over his face told him the sword had found him. The fact that he was conscious told him it hadn't found him thoroughly enough. He took inventory. 2 hands. 2 feet. The bandage was substantial. He probed it with cautious fingers, and the probing produced pain that told him the damage was to his nose and his cheek, and something else below his left eye that he was not going to examine closely until he was somewhere with better lighting and a mirror. The cell was not a Red Keep cell. The stone was different. The smell was different. The specific sensory signature of a dungeon that had been used for a different king's prisoners recently enough that the previous occupant's presence still lingered in the air. Someone was at the door. Not a guard. The light was wrong for a guard. You're awake. The voice was accented. The East, the specific accent of a woman who came from somewhere that most people in Westeros had never been, and that most people in Westeros could not find on a map, and that was, apparently, sending its representatives to sit outside the dungeons of captured King's Landing in the middle of the night. The Red Woman, Tyrion said. His voice sounded terrible, nasal, muffled. The sound of a man speaking through significant facial bandaging. Yes, I've been expecting you. He sat up. The sitting up was more work than he'd have liked. Or someone like you. What does he want? The king wants nothing from you yet. I came on my own account. That's alarming. Tyrion shifted. The cell had a bench, and he found it by feel. When agents of gods visit dungeons on their own account, the accounts tend to be expensive. I came to tell you something. I assumed. The people who come to tell me things when I'm in dungeons have historically had poor news delivery skills. My father, for instance. Would you like to continue the tradition? Your father is coming. Tyrion stopped. He's 2 days south. His army is intact. He knows the city has fallen. Melisandre's voice was flat in the way that flat voices were when they were being deliberately controlled. He will come to terms. Not because he wants to. Because the alternative is attacking a king in a fortified city with 500,000 witnesses, and Tywin Lannister does not waste soldiers on gestures. My father rarely does anything on my behalf. He'll do this one. Not for you. For the family, for the Lannister position. She paused. The king will want you in the negotiation. You are the most politically sophisticated Lannister available, and the king knows this even if it angers him. Stannis wants me as a negotiator. Stannis wants someone who can read your father and tell him what your father is actually offering, as opposed to what your father is saying he's offering. Those are frequently different documents. Tyrion sat on the bench in the dark, with his face in pieces, and his family's army 2 days south. And a red priestess telling him things she shouldn't know from outside his cell in the middle of the night. What do you want from me? He asked. Not the question he should have asked, the question he couldn't help asking, because the most interesting thing in any room was always the person who was operating a level below what they were showing. I want nothing from you. The Lord of Light wants Stannis to succeed. Stannis succeeding requires stable governance. Stable governance requires competent people. You're competent. That's the most indirect compliment I've ever received. You're welcome. I wasn't thanking you. He probed the bandage again. The probing was going to become a habit until he could see the damage. Tell the king I'll cooperate. Conditionally. The conditions being? My sister and my nephew alive. Myrcella in Dawn undisturbed. My personal position. I'm not asking for titles or power. I'm asking for the specific acknowledgement that I fought for the city's defense, and that the defense, however it ended, was conducted in good faith. Good faith. Melisandre's voice had something in it that might have been amusement. That's a novel argument for a Lannister. I'm a novel Lannister. He lay back down. The bench was uncomfortable. All benches in dungeons were uncomfortable. This was a design feature. Tell him tomorrow. I need to sleep. She left. Tyrion lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling he couldn't see, and thought about his father coming, and thought about the calculation, and thought about what cooperation meant in a kingdom where the man he'd just unsuccessfully tried to defend was now the prisoner of the man he was going to have to work for. He thought, this is exactly the kind of situation that I am uniquely qualified to navigate, and that will almost certainly destroy me. He thought, well, at least it's interesting. Tywin. 2 days south, the calculation. Tywin Lannister received the raven from Stannis at midday. He read it once, folded it, put it in his doublet, looked at the road north. The road north went to King's Landing, which now belonged to a king who was not a Lannister, and not a Lannister's instrument, and who had taken it with a fleet that Tywin's intelligence had underestimated, and with a timing that Tywin's cavalry had failed to counter by a margin that was going to require a significant revision of how Tywin thought about margins. He considered his options. This was what Tywin did when options presented themselves. He considered them with the specific cold methodology of a man who had been converting crises into opportunities for 40 years, and who treated each new crisis as a problem in arithmetic rather than a problem in emotion. Option 1. Attack. The army was intact. 2 days' march. Stannis' men were exhausted from the battle. His fleet was wrecked. His hold on the city was 48 hours old. The attack might succeed. Tywin rejected this. Not because it was wrong militarily. The arithmetic was unfavorable but not impossible. Because it was wrong politically. A Lannister army attacking a king in possession of the Iron Throne, in possession of the Lannister king's children, in possession of the city. The attack produced a war that lasted years, and that the Lannister position, already weakened by the loss of the throne, could not sustain. The Reach would come to terms with Stannis. The Riverlands were already his. The Stormlands, naturally. The North was fighting Tywin in the Riverlands. The Vale was neutral. Dawn was waiting. Option 2. Flee. To the Westerlands. To Casterly Rock. To the position of a house in rebellion that was not currently attacking, but was not submitting either. Tywin rejected this too. Faster. Casterly Rock could hold for years. The Lannister gold made the holding possible indefinitely, theoretically. But hold to what purpose? The Lannisters were not the Targaryens, surviving in exile for decades on the hope of restoration. The Lannisters were bankers. They needed the economy. They needed the trade routes. They needed the specific position in the realm's financial architecture that made Lannister gold worth what Lannister gold was worth. That position was inside the realm, not in rebellion against it. Option 3. Negotiate. This was the option. Negotiate from the strongest possible position while that position was available. Stannis was 48 hours in. His governance was theoretical. His legitimacy was his. The legal argument for his claim had always been strong, since Jon Arryn had made it, and Ned Stark had died for it. But legal legitimacy and operational legitimacy were different. Stannis needed the Lannisters' cooperation more than the Lannisters needed Stannis' pardon. For the next few weeks, anyway. After that, the calculation would shift. "Sir Kevan," Tywin said. His brother came. The reliable one. The brother who had spent his life being the second most important Lannister in every room he occupied, and who had performed the role without resentment, because Kevan Lannister was constitutionally incapable of resentment, and because performing the role correctly was its own satisfaction. "Send word to Stannis. Tell him, Lord Tywin Lannister, Warden of the West, Lord of Casterly Rock, requests a meeting at the city gates, under flag of parley, to discuss the terms of..." Tywin paused. The phrasing mattered. The terms of a transition that benefits the realm. Not submission, Kevan said. Not a question. The specific Kevan quality of reading his brother so completely that the questions were already answered. Not submission. Not yet. Tywin folded his hands behind his back and looked at the road. "I have children in that city. Grandchildren. That gives me leverage he doesn't want me to have, and that I will not invoke unless he forces the invocation. He's a man of law. He won't hurt children. He won't hurt them. He'll use them. He'll keep them as insurance against Lannister behavior, which is exactly what I would do. I want the children free before the negotiation concludes. That is the first term. Everything else is negotiable." Kevan looked at his brother. "Cersei," Kevan said. "Cersei is..." Tywin stopped, started again. "Cersei is in a cell, because Cersei's decisions have put her there, and the decisions were made by Cersei, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. I will negotiate for her life and her freedom. I will not negotiate for her position. The position is gone. She won't accept that. She will accept what the situation requires. What Cersei will or will not accept is irrelevant to what the situation contains." He turned. "Send the Raven, and have the cavalry stand down. I want no aggressive posture. I want to arrive at those gates looking like a lord coming to pay his respects, not like an army looking for a fight." Kevan went. Tywin stood on the road. He was not going to let himself feel the loss. Not yet. Not while the crisis was open. The crisis absorbed everything. The grief, the rage, the specific Tywin emotion about his daughter in a cell, and his grandson a prisoner, and the throne he had spent so much to keep going to a man who had never asked for his help, and who was going to be all the more powerful for not needing it. He would feel it later. Later, when the terms were settled, and the position was secured, and the Lannister future was not restored. It couldn't be restored, but stabilized. Later. He walked to his tent. He began to write the letter that would either secure everything or cost everything, and the writing was the most controlled he had been in 40 years, which told him how frightened he actually was. Davos and Melisandre. The conversation. She was in the room that had been Cersei's solar. Not because she had claimed it, because Stannis had assigned her to the rooms adjacent to his own. The practical decision of a man who wanted his most influential advisor close, and who had not yet decided whether the influence was an asset or a liability. The solar had Cersei's things in it still. Her mirrors, her cosmetics, the specific material evidence of a woman who had occupied a space and who had been removed from it quickly enough that the space still bore her imprint. Melisandre had not removed the things. She was standing at the window when Davos entered, looking at the city. From this window the city was visible. The streets, the docks, the bay where the wildfire had burned, and where the wreckage still floated in the specific slow dispersion pattern of destroyed things, returning to their component materials. "Close the door," she said. Davos closed the door. "Sit. I'll stand." He did not want the specific vulnerability of sitting in the presence of this woman with the specific clarity about what had happened and what her role in it had been. Standing was better. Standing was its own kind of argument. She turned from the window. She looked at him with the red eyes, the eyes that were always the most disorienting thing about her, the eyes that were either the mark of her god, or the mark of her origins, or simply the genetic inheritance of a region that produced unusual coloring. Davos had never decided. He had settled on unsettling and possibly irrelevant as his operational position. "You want to blame me?" she said. "I want to ask you a question. You want to ask me whether I saw it." She turned back to the window. "Whether the fires showed me what would happen at the Blackwater. Whether I knew men would die. Whether I knew Mathos would die." "Did you?" "The fires show what they show. They do not show everything. They do not show with the specificity that you want them to show. They show shapes, directions, not names." She paused. "I did not see Mathos Seaworth in the fire," said Davos. "I did not see his death. But you saw something." "I saw the battle. I saw fire, the wildfire, the green, the unnatural flame that your lord used and that burned ships. I saw it in the fire before I saw it on the water. And you didn't tell him to change the approach. The approach was the approach that won." She said it without apology. Not cruelly, without the feeling that cruelty would have indicated the specific flat delivery of a woman who operated on a logic that was not Davos's logic, and who did not experience the gap between the logics as something requiring apology. Men died. Men die in battles. The battle was won. The throne is Stannis's. My son is dead. Yes, and that registers as what? A cost? A line item? An acceptable subtraction from the sum of your lord's victory? She turned fully to face him. Her face was complicated, not cold. The specific Melisandre face that Davos had been trying to read for a year and that resisted reading because the face had been trained into a kind of steadiness that concealed whether the steadiness was emptiness or suppression. "Your son believed," she said. "He followed the Lord of Light. He died in service of a king that the Lord of Light has chosen. That is not nothing," said Davos. "To die in service of a righteous cause. Don't." The word stopped her. "Don't tell me about righteous causes. Don't tell me about the Lord of Light. Don't dress my son's death up in theology and present it to me as consolation." His voice. The flea bottom underneath the court manor. The specific register that surfaced when the court manor was insufficient. He was 23. He learned to read because he believed in your God. He served on that ship because he believed in your king. He is dead because your king needed a fleet, and I provided one, and the fleet sailed into wildfire. And the king won because of it, and the king won because of it. He held her gaze. That's the thing I can't argue with. That's the thing that keeps me from from saying what I want to say to you. Because you're right. We won. We won. And Mathos is dead. And both of those things are true. And the trueness of one of them doesn't reduce the trueness of the other. And I need you to know that. I know it. Do you? I know more about the cost of service than you believe I do. She turned back to the window. Something in the posture, the specific angle of the shoulders, changed. I have served the Lord of Light since before your son was born. I have sent men to their deaths in service of the purpose. I do not feel nothing. What do you feel? That the purpose is worth the cost. She looked at the city. That is not the same as feeling nothing. It is not the same as callousness. It is the specific burden of believing in something larger than the individual that demands the individual be sacrificed when the larger thing requires it. Davos stood in the room. He thought, I don't know if she is lying. I have never been able to tell. He thought, she might be telling the truth, and that might be worse. Stay away from him, Davos said. She looked at him. Sharp, that is not your decision to make. Stannis has a kingdom now. He has a city, a throne, lords to manage, a succession to establish. He has more than Dragonstone, and a fleet and a red woman whispering prophecies. He doesn't need. He chose his words. He doesn't need the same relationship with you that served him on Dragonstone. And you'll provide a different relationship. I'll provide honest counsel, which is what I've always provided, which is what he needs more than shadows and flames and kings who die with antlers growing from their chests. Renly's death was yours. I know it. He knows it. The realm suspects it. He looked at her. One day that debt will come due, not from me, from the political reality of being king of a realm that believes you kill rivals with shadow magic. When that day comes, I'll be the one talking Stannis off the ledge that your methods built. Melisandre said nothing for a long moment. You don't trust me, she finally said. No, but you'll work with me. Because Stannis needs both of us, and I need him to succeed, not for the Lord of Light, for the realm. He went to the door, stopped, and because I think you're not wrong about everything, which is the most I'm able to say. He left. Melisandre stood at the window. She looked at the fire on the water, the last of the wildfire, still burning in the corner of the bay, the specific, impossible green persistence of magic that had been designed to never stop. She prayed. Whether the prayer was heard was between her and her God. The city. What taking it cost. The city hated him. Not immediately. Immediately the city was processing shock, the specific collective processing of 500,000 people, absorbing the information that the king had changed, and that the change had been violent, and that the specific things they had organized their daily lives around, the gold cloak patrol routes, the bread prices, the guilds, the markets, the specific fabric of a city's functional existence, were all in the process of being reorganized by new management. The hatred took 3 days. It came through the specific channels that city hatred used, the preachers on the street corners, the pamphlets that appeared on walls and were torn down and appeared again, the songs in the taverns that were not yet openly seditious, but that were the specific kind of not yet open that everyone understood was a technicality. The hatred was Lannister funded. Partly. The gold that Littlefinger had accumulated and that Tywin's people had distributed before the city fell. The specific investment in narrative that money could produce. The funding of the voices that would turn a public sentiment in the desired direction. But not entirely. Not even mostly. The city's native displeasure with Stannis Baratheon was the city's own. King's Landing had not wanted Stannis before the battle, and it did not want him after. The city understood, at some collective animal level, that Stannis was not the kind of king that King's Landing had evolved to host. The city had evolved for kings who wanted things from it. Its beauty, its wealth, its culture, its parties, its spectacle. Robert had been that kind of king. Joffrey had been a terrible version of it. Even the Mad King at his best had loved the city's splendor. Stannis did not love the city's splendor. Stannis found the city's splendor wasteful. Stannis's first act of governance had been to institute bread rationing, the second to reform the city watch, and the third to begin a comprehensive audit of the crown's finances that made Littlefinger's ledgers look like a shopping list. The city received these acts with the specific city response to good governance: resentment. Good governance was boring and restrictive, and it did not celebrate the city, and it did not throw feasts, and it did not make the streets feel like the streets were the center of the world. Davos understood this. He walked the city in the first week, not with an escort, not as an official, as a man who had grown up in Flea Bottom, and who understood the city's body language in a way that most lords did not. He walked through the Flea Bottom streets where he'd grown up, and he watched the sullen faces, and he listened to the muttered things, and he went back to the Red Keep, and he told Stannis what he'd found. "They hate you," he said. Stannis looked up from the financial audit. "I know. They hate you in the specific way that a city hates someone who is making them behave themselves. Good. Behaving themselves is what's required. Your Grace." Davos sat. The sitting was the council mode Davos, the advisor mode, the specific register that was not sycophantic and not combative, but that was something in between that Stannis had come to rely on, and that was the thing Davos was best at. A king cannot rule a city that hates him without a significant garrison. The garrison consumes resources. The resources are the problem we're solving with the audit. You're in a circle. The circle closes when the lords submit and the supply lines reopen. The lords won't submit while the city is visibly hostile. Visible hostility reads as instability to lords who are making risk calculations. Lords making risk calculations don't submit. They wait. Stannis set down the audit, looked at Davos. "What would you have me do? Throw a feast? Open the brothels? Let the guilds run their own rackets?" His voice had the Stannis edge, the specific, irritated compression that happened when Stannis was being told something he already knew, and that he found annoying to hear, because knowing it and having a solution were different things. "I'd have you make one gesture. One thing that the city can read as human. I am human. I know that. The city doesn't." Davos held his gaze. The city sees law and order, and audits and rationing. The city doesn't see a person. It sees a function. Good. A king is a function. A king is a function that needs to be chosen by people who could choose otherwise. Davos leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to be Robert. I'm asking you to go outside the Red Keep, to walk the Street of Steel or the River Row. Not to hand out bread, to be seen. To be a person in a city rather than an administrator in a castle. People hate functions. They have complicated feelings about persons. You don't need to be loved. You need to be complicated." Stannis looked at him. The look lasted. The specific Stannis evaluation that processed advice through the filter of his particular pride. The pride that resented being managed, that resented the specific implication that he needed to perform anything, that believed the doing of the right thing was its own argument, and that the right thing's failure to be recognized was the audience's failure, and not the performance's. "I'll consider it," he said. Which was Stannis for? Probably not. But not never. Davos accepted the probably not and went back to his work. 3 days later, Stannis walked the Street of Steel. Unannounced, with 2 guards only, not a procession, not a spectacle, 2 men in armor and a king in his simplest traveling clothes. He walked the length of the street. He stopped at a forge. He watched the blacksmith work for a few minutes. The blacksmith was terrified, then confused, then not warmed, that was too strong a word, but reduced in his terror by the specific humanizing effect of watching a king watch him work without any drama. Stannis did not make a speech. He did not buy anything. He nodded at the blacksmith and walked on. The Street of Steel talked about it for a week. Not enthusiastically. Not with the love that Robert's random encounters with common people had produced. The impromptu drinking, the arm around the shoulder, the bellowing laugh that made the small folk feel like they were being included in something. The Street of Steel talked about it the way people talked about something unexpected and mildly encouraging. He came. He watched. He left. It was not triumph. It was progress. Tywin at the gate. The parley. Tywin came to the King's Gate on the 4th day. He came as he'd promised Kevan he would, without an aggressive posture, without the cavalry and battle formation, with the specific visual vocabulary of a lord coming to speak, rather than a general coming to fight. 50 men. The Lannister banner. Himself in travelling clothes rather than armour, which was itself the most significant signal. "I am here for a conversation." Stannis met him at the gate. The two men looked at each other across the space between them, and the space contained every calculation each had made about the other since the moment one of them had a fleet and the other had an army, and the fleet had been the deciding variable. "Lord Lannister," Stannis said. "Your Grace." The words. Flat. Correct. The specific vocal register of a man producing the required form of address without adding either warmth or ceremony. The minimum compliance that was itself its own message. The city has fallen. The city has been taken. Yes. I come to discuss the terms of... Tywin chose his next word. Accommodation. Stannis almost smiled. Almost. The specific facial event that happened on Stannis's face when he found something amusing and was suppressing the finding. Not submission. Not submission. Not yet. Terms first. My terms are simple. Your family swears fealty. I restore your lands and titles. The bastards, Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen, are formally declared bastards through the legal process already in motion. They are not executed. He held Tywin's gaze. They are not executed, Lord Lannister. You have my word on that, and my word is worth more than your gold. You know it is. Tywin was still. The Tywin stillness, the mask, was operating at full capacity. The Queen will be tried for adultery and the crime of presenting bastards as the king's legitimate heirs. The trial will be conducted properly. The verdict will be. The evidence is what the evidence is. The sentence depends on the trial. Stannis met the gaze. I am not going to execute Cersei Lannister in advance of a trial, simply to make the negotiation cleaner for you. If you want to discuss her safety, demonstrate that the Lannister position warrants consideration. Bend the knee. Something crossed Tywin's face. Briefly. Not emotion. The recognition of a man who had spent 40 years controlling every negotiation he was in, discovering that he was not controlling this one. There is the matter of the crown's debt, Tywin said. To House Lannister. 3 million gold dragons. I know the number. Stannis' voice was flat. I've been reading the books. The books show that Robert Baratheon spent the crown into bankruptcy on wine and tournaments, and the specific entertainment of a man who found ruling tedious. I know what the books show. He stepped forward, not aggressively, the specific Stannis physical habit of closing the distance when a conversation was in danger of becoming abstract. I will honor the debt, in installments, over time, at the rate the Treasury can support. I will not pay it in a lump sum because the lump sum does not exist, and pretending otherwise is the kind of fiction that your master of coin was paid to maintain, and that I am not paying to maintain. Tywin looked at him. He looked at Stannis Baratheon, the king he'd calculated as beatable for 2 years, the brother he'd dismissed as Robert's lesser option, the commander he'd underestimated at the Blackwater by a quarter hour, and his assessment revised itself with the specific grudging accuracy that Tywin applied to miscalculations when the miscalculation was his own. You'll need a hand, Tywin said. Yes. I'm available. The silence that followed was particular. The silence of a man who has just offered something, and a man who has just received the offer, and who is deciding whether the offer is an asset or a trap. You would serve as hand to a king you try to keep from the throne, Stannis said. I would serve the realm. The realm needs functional governance. You need someone who knows how to govern it. Tywin's voice was the voice of a man making an argument he believed in, even though the argument served his interests. You are a man of war and law. You are not a man of politics. You will fail at the politics without help. I am the most qualified person available to provide that help. You are also the man who, when helping Robert, helped himself in equal measure. A hand who helps only the king and not himself is a hand who will be replaced within the year. Tywin allowed something into his voice that was almost not honesty. Tywin and honesty had a complicated relationship, but the acknowledgement of an honest thing. I serve the realm because the realm's stability is the Lannister position. Those interests are aligned more than you want to believe they are. Stannis turned, began to walk back toward the gate. The hand appointment will be considered, he said, along with everything else. And my daughter? Stannis stopped, did not turn. Your daughter will be treated as the law requires. If that is not satisfactory, Lord Lannister. You are free to make the other choice. Your army is intact. The city is not as defenseless as it was the day before the battle. He walked to the gate. I hope you choose wisely. He went inside. Tywin stood at the gate and looked at the walls of King's Landing and understood, for the first time in 40 years, what it felt like to be on the wrong side of the power. It felt, he decided, exactly the way he had made it feel for other people. He rode back to his camp. He made the other choice, which was, he chose wisely. The Tyrells, the reach, the recalculation. Olenna Tyrell received the news in her litter. She had been traveling with the Tyrell force, the cavalry that had been 2 hours too late, that had heard the trumpets and seen the gates, and understood that the city had fallen before any of them had cleared the King's Road's last bend. She had been in the litter because she was 70 years old, and the road was rough, and she was not Stannis Baratheon. Able to sustain discomfort through the power of principle, she had been comfortable in the litter, and she had received the news of the battle's outcome with the specific equanimity of a woman who had been preparing for the wrong outcomes for 70 years, and who had learned to recalibrate. Mace was outside the litter, on his horse, looking the way Mace always looked in crises, large, uncomfortable, casting about for someone to tell him what to do. He had been told what to do by Loras, who had been told what to do by the military commanders, who had been told to halt by Olenna's courier before any of them reached the gate. She opened the litter curtain. "Come," she said. Mace climbed in. The litter groaned. It had not been designed for Mace Tyrell. "The city has fallen," he said. He had a gift for saying the obvious thing. "Yes, Stannis has the throne. The battle is over." She looked at her son, at the man who led House Tyrell. Nominally, the man whose name was on the titles and the documents and the seals, and who exercised the function of lord with all the authority of a very large man, who had been told what to do by his mother since he was old enough to take orders. What did we lose? The men who, the fighting at the gates, before the halt, perhaps 200 men, and the Lannister alliance. She tapped her chin. And the marriage. Margaery was supposed to marry Joffrey. Had been supposed to marry Joffrey. Had been introduced to the court and had been performing the role of future queen with the specific Tyrell application of beauty and political intelligence to the task of securing a position that was now occupied by a different king. Margaery, Mace said. He said it in the voice he used when he was thinking about Margaery, which was the voice of a father who loved his daughter and who could not follow the speed of her mind, and who compensated by producing simple declarative statements in her direction and hoping they landed. Margaery is 17. Olenna looked at her hands. She is unmarried, she is beautiful and intelligent, and she has spent the past year learning how to be a queen. That education is not wasted simply because the king changed. Stannis won't. Stannis has a queen. Lady Selyse. Selyse is not the concern. Selyse has never been the concern. Olenna closed the curtain. The concern is, what does Stannis need that the Tyrells can provide, and what will Stannis give us in exchange for providing it? He has the throne. He has the throne and no food supply. The Crownlands produce a fraction of what the city requires. The Westerlands supply lines are cut. The Riverlands are wrecked. The North is at war. She looked at her son. He needs the Reach. The Reach is grain. The Reach is soldiers. He lost thousands at the Blackwater. The Reach is the most intact great house in the realm. She paused. He needs us more than he wants to. He won't negotiate a marriage for Tommen. Tommen will be declared a bastard. I am not proposing Tommen. I am proposing consideration. Her voice had the specific quality it had when the thinking was ahead of the conversation. Send word to King's Landing. Tell them Lord Mace Tyrell wishes to congratulate his grace on his accession, and to offer the Reachies grain supplies to the capital at preferential rates as a gesture of goodwill from a loyal vassal. But we're not. We haven't submitted. We're submitting now. This is the submission. She opened the curtain again and called for her courier. We bend the knee through grain. We give him the food the city needs, and we let the giving speak louder than any battle flags. By the time the formal submission is arranged, Stannis will already be eating Tyrell bread, and the eating will make the arrangement seem natural. Mace watched his mother. He said, "Should I tell Margaery?" Margaery already knows. Margaery has known since the litter stopped. She's on her horse, 200 feet back, planning the next 10 years of her life. Mace looked back. Margaery was there, on her white horse, the Tyrell banner behind her, her face turned toward the city on the horizon. She was not distressed. She looked, from a distance, like a woman considering a board. "She is remarkable," Mace said. "She is exactly what I made her," Olenna said. "Now close the curtain." Robb Stark. The North, the news. The Raven reached Robb at River Run. He read it in his war tent, with grey wind at his feet and Catelyn at his shoulder, and the specific exhausted alertness of a commander who had been managing a war on 4 fronts for months, and who had learned to receive news with the face of a lord, even when the news moved things in unexpected directions. Stannis had taken King's Landing. He read it twice. "He won," Catelyn said. "He won." Robb set the letter down, looked at the map. The markers on the map, Lannister forces, Stark forces, Tyrell, the phrase, the specific constellation of armies and positions that had defined the past months, rearranged themselves in his mind as the meaning of the letter landed. Which means everything changes. How? Because Stannis on the throne is not the same as Joffrey on the throne. Robb stood, walked to the map. With Joffrey, we were fighting a usurper who had murdered my father and who had no legitimate claim. The North had a reason to be in the field. Every man I'd called had a reason to follow because the thing we were fighting was clearly wrong. Stannis's claim is legitimate. That's the problem. He put his hand on the Riverlands marker. I called the banners for my father and my sisters. My father is dead. My sisters, Stannis has them now. Or he will. He looked at his mother. He will treat them better than Cersei did. He is a man of law. He doesn't harm prisoners without cause. He could use them as leverage. He will use them as leverage. That's what prisoners are for. Robb turned, walked. The specific Robb movement of a commander in a tent. The pacing, the kinetic processing, the body thinking alongside the mind. If I keep fighting, I'm fighting the legitimate king of the 7 kingdoms. My lords will notice that. The phrase will notice that. Every man with a grudge will use that as the reason to go home. You haven't lost. I haven't lost a battle. I've lost the political argument. He stopped. The cause was, Joffrey is a bastard. He murdered my father. The throne is usurped. Stannis proves the first thing. He didn't do the second thing. And the third thing is settled now, that Stannis has the throne. He looked at the map. I'm fighting for the North's independence. I can still argue that. But it's a harder argument than justice. Catelyn was quiet. She was in the specific Catelyn state that Robb had learned to read, the state where the mother and the advisor were operating simultaneously, and where the mother was losing the argument. The mother wanted her daughters home. The mother wanted the war over. The mother had been in this war for months and had watched the war produce costs that the mother's accounting system tracked differently than the military commanders. "What will you do?" she asked. "Send a raven to Stannis. Acknowledge the throne. Ask for my sister's return. Negotiate." He looked at her. The Robb look. The charismatic authority that he'd been growing into over months of command. The specific quality of his father mixed with something faster and more flexible. And keep the army in the field while I negotiate. Because Stannis respects strength, and submitting with a disbanded army is submitting with nothing to offer. And the North's independence is the price I ask for submitting. He returned to the map. Stannis wants submission. I have 20,000 men and the most intact military force in the realm after his. I am worth more to him as a vassal king in the North than as a continuing enemy. The argument is there. Whether he accepts it. He paused. Stannis is a man of law. He may refuse on principle. The North is part of the 7 kingdoms. Accepting the North's independence means acknowledging that a subject can declare himself a king and not be punished for it. Which he won't do. Which he might not do. He looked at the window, at the river-run battlements beyond. Or he might. Because the practical argument for accepting it is stronger than the principal argument for refusing. Stannis understands practical arguments, even when they conflict with his principles. He just makes you feel very judged for making them. Catelyn almost smiled. Not quite. The situation was not a smiling situation. "Theon," she started. Winterfell. Robb's jaw. The Stark jaw. The specific compression that happened when the jaw was doing the work that the voice wasn't doing. I know. I've had the reports. He looked at his mother. I'm handling it. After this. After this. In the order that the order requires. He went back to the table, sat, picked up a quill. Stannis first, the family first, Winterfell. He paused over the word. Over the specific wound that the word had become in the weeks since the report. Winterfell after. He wrote the letter. Stannis and Tyrion. The agreement. They brought Tyrion to the throne room. He walked on his own feet. They'd given him back his clothes and removed the restraints when it became clear that the dungeon was performing no function other than symbolic, and Stannis had no patience for symbolic punishments that served no practical purpose. Tyrion walked into the throne room with the specific Tyrion gait that always communicated more ease than he felt, and he looked up at the man on the Iron Throne, and the man on the Iron Throne looked down at him. You defended the city, Stannis said. I defended the city, Tyrion agreed. Unsuccessfully, as it turned out, though not for want of effort. The wildfire was your plan. The wildfire was my plan. The chain was my plan. The placement of the archers was my plan. The failure to account for the specific determination of a man who was not going to stop coming was not entirely my failure, though I'll own a share of it. You fought on the walls. Until someone from my side tried to kill me, yes. He paused. That someone was Mandan Moore, who I suspect was operating under my sister's instructions. I make this observation not to complain, but because it seems relevant to the disposition of my person. I fought for the city. The city was defended as long as it was defended in part because of me. My sister tried to have me killed while I was doing it. Stannis looked at him. The Stannis look. The specific evaluation that happened when Stannis encountered someone new, and was deciding where the person fit in the taxonomy of useful and dangerous. Tyrion had been categorized as both useful and dangerous since the moment Stannis' intelligence had confirmed who had built the wildfire defense, and the dual categorization made the look more complicated than usual. My father has arrived at terms, Stannis said. I assumed he would. Tywin Lannister loses battles occasionally. He doesn't lose campaigns. He's submitted. The family retains its lands. The debt is being restructured. Cersei will be tried. And I? You are an interesting question. Stannis leaned forward. The Iron Throne caught the light badly, the blades and the edges of the swords catching it at wrong angles and producing a visual effect that was either dramatic or undignified, depending on your tolerance for theatrical furniture. You are a Lannister who fought against the Lannisters' interests in a way that may have prolonged this war by months, but that cost me significant losses in ships and men. I fought for the crown. The crown's interests and the Lannister interests happened to coincide. Did they? You knew the legal situation. You knew what I'd declared. You knew Joffrey was a bastard. I knew what you'd declared. I am not responsible for drawing conclusions about declarations made by people with motivations to declare them. Tyrion's voice was measured. Careful in the way that Tyrion was careful when the carefulness was the thing standing between him and a bad outcome. I served the crown. The crown changed hands. You want to prosecute me for serving a crown in good faith. That's a precedent that won't encourage future service. Stannis was quiet. Then, what did Melisandre say to you in the dungeon? Tyrion hesitated. Just the specific Tyrion micro pause that indicated the recalibration of a man who has received new information and is deciding how to process it. She said my father was coming. That you'd want me in the negotiation. And she seemed to be suggesting that I make myself useful. He looked up at Stannis. She was right. I am useful. Specifically, I'm useful in the specific way that you need something useful and don't want to admit you need it. Which is, you're going to be king of a city that hates you, managing lords who are submitting under duress, dealing with a northern king in the field who is negotiating from strength, and managing a red woman who has interests of her own. You have Davos, who is honest and excellent, and whose specific value is that he won't tell you what you want to hear. What you also need is someone who will tell you what your enemies are thinking, who will read the room that you don't want to be in. He paused. I know where all the bodies are buried in this city. I know which lords are lying in their submissions, and which ones actually mean them. I know how the guilds operate, and where the corruption in the gold cloaks is, and what Cersei was actually doing in the months before the battle. You'd betray your sister's confidences. My sister tried to have me killed. My father allowed me to sit in a dungeon for weeks while he calculated his position. My family's relationship with me has been one of mutual instrumentalization, and I am instrumentalizing back. He held the gaze. I'm not asking for a position. I'm asking for a role. Something functional, below the level of lord or advisor, where I can be useful in ways that don't require you to publicly trust me. What would that role be called? Tyrion thought. The king's reader of difficult rooms, no official title, no seat on the small council. Just the man who goes to the conversations you can't send Davos to because Davos is too honest, and that you can't go to yourself because kings don't negotiate in taverns. Stannis stared at him. You're describing an intelligence function. I'm describing what I've been doing for the last 3 years of my life. Only now I'd be doing it for a king who doesn't want me dead. Stannis was silent for a long time. 3 conditions, he said. Name them. You will not lie to me. Ever, about anything. I will know. I have an instinct for it, a very good one, and the first time I catch you lying, the arrangement ends. Agreed. You will not take independent action. You will report. You will advise. You will not act. Action requires my authority. Agreed, though I reserve the right to argue with the authority. Arguing is not action. Agreed. He looked at Tyrion. 3rd condition, your sister. Cersei, the trial. You will not interfere. Not in the process, not in the outcome, not in the delivery of the verdict. Whatever happens to Cersei happens because the law requires it. Not because a Lannister has managed the outcome. Tyrion was quiet. The room was quiet. What if the law requires something I think is wrong? He asked. Then, you tell me, and I will consider your argument, and I will make the decision, and you will accept the decision. Stannis held his gaze. I am not asking you to enjoy this. I am asking you to accept it. Tyrion looked at the throne, at the man on it, at the specific hard quality of Stannis Baratheon that was both the thing that had driven people away from him, and the thing that had, in the end, put him on that throne. Agreed, Tyrion said. Then we understand each other. Rarely, but we can work together anyway. Stannis said, leave. Tyrion left. In the corridor, he leaned against the wall and waited for his heart rate to return to something approaching functional. Then he straightened, adjusted his clothes, walked toward the section of the Red Keep where the interesting conversations were happening. He had work to do. Cersei, the trial, 300 AC. The trial was held 3 weeks after the city fell. Not in the throne room, in the Great Sept of Baelor, which was Stannis' decision and which contained the specific Stannis symbolism of a man who did not worship the Seven, but who understood that the Seven's house was the realm's house, and that a trial of a queen for the crimes of adultery and fraud required the highest possible institutional legitimacy. 7 judges. The High Septon, the new one, the one who had been appointed after the old one's death, a thinner man, with the specific nervous energy of an official who has been elevated beyond his comfort and who is managing the elevation by being very careful about everything. 2 lords paramount who had submitted, Mace Tyrell and Edmure Tully, whose submission had been part of the general post-Blackwater reconfiguration. Lord Stannis's Maester Adjourn in the academic capacity, a representative of the City Watch. Devos Seaworth, whose presence as judge was Stannis's specific choice, and that choice was its own statement about whose opinion he trusted. And Tywin Lannister. This was the controversial one. Including Tywin in the panel of judges for his own daughter's trial was, the objections had come from everywhere. Roland, diplomatically. Melisandre, with the specific red woman's certainty that blood should not judge blood. Davos, with the specific flat honesty that was his mode. It looks wrong, Your Grace. Even if it isn't, it looks wrong. Stannis' argument. Tywin Lannister's submission is conditional on the family being treated according to law. The law includes the right of family members to observe proceedings. Exclusion would be cited as proof of bias. Inclusion is uncomfortable but defensible. I will manage uncomfortable. I will not manage the accusation of a rigged proceeding. Davos had accepted this argument. He had accepted it the way he accepted most of Stannis' arguments that were right, but that were also missing something. with the expression of a man who was storing an objection for later. Cersei came to trial in the clothes she'd worn in the holdfast. Someone had brought her a change, but she'd refused it. The specific Cersei defiance of a woman who understood that her appearance was the only domain remaining to her, and who had decided that worn court clothes communicated I was queen more effectively than fresh ones. She came in with her chin up and her eyes forward, and the expression of a woman who had rehearsed this walk for 3 weeks, and who was performing it exactly as rehearsed. The charges were read. Adultery with Ser Jaime of the Kingsguard, the presentation of 3 bastard children as the legitimate heirs of King Robert, the suborning of Grand Maester Pycelle's testimony. Pycelle had suppressed the treatment that might have saved Jon Arryn's life, acting on Cersei's instruction to prevent Arryn from completing his investigation. The conspiracy to conceal the true parentage of the children presented as heirs, extending to the corruption of multiple crown officials. The Pycelle charge was Tyrion's contribution. He had brought the evidence to Stannis 2 weeks before the trial, Pycelle's own correspondence, found in his chambers after the Old Master fled and was recovered at the city gate. Stannis had included it. Tyrion had not asked for credit. He had not been in the Sept. He had been in the tavern across the river, drinking, because he didn't want to watch, and he didn't want to explain why he didn't want to watch. Cersei denied everything except the children. This was the specific Cersei strategic choice. Admit the children, deny the adultery, position the children as a consequence of an assault that she had been unable to prevent and that she had hidden to protect the crown from scandal. The argument was not convincing. It was not designed to be convincing to the judges. It was designed to create a narrative that the people outside the Sept could choose to believe if they wanted to. The specific Cersei understanding that trials were not just legal events, but political performances. Tywin sat through the proceedings with his face controlled. He was watching his daughter deny her own children's parentage. He was watching the evidence, the lineage book, the bastard children, the testimony of the servants, produce the specific legal certainty that he had been managing around for years. He was watching the trial that he had spent years preventing and that he was now participating in as a judge. His face gave nothing. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on the charges of adultery and the fraudulent presentation of bastard children as heirs. Guilty on the Pycelle corruption charge. The evidence of the correspondence was sufficient. The verdict was unanimous and clean, without the shadow of an unprovable accusation hanging over it. Stannis had been specific about this when the charges were drafted. Only what could be proven. No reaching. No political charges dressed as legal ones. The law required evidence, and the evidence was what it was. The sentence, not death. This was Stannis's instruction to the judges, and it was also the law's requirement. The adultery charge carried death, or the option of the Faith's mercy at the Sept's discretion, and the High Septon exercised the mercy option with the specific relief of a man who had been dreading the other option, and who was grateful for the theological out. Life confinement. In the Maiden Vault in the Red Keep, the specific historical room that had been used for women who needed to be contained without being destroyed. Cersei heard the sentence with the expression she had prepared for it. She had prepared for death. The death expression, the specific Cersei composure that said, "I will not show you the fear," had been what she was holding when the sentence was read. The actual sentence, life confinement, landed differently. Not better. Differently. Death was an ending. Confinement was a continuation in a box. Cersei Lannister in a box was not something her imagination had prepared her for. Her expression changed. Just for a moment. The composure fractured, and what was underneath? Not fear, not grief. The specific raw fury of a woman who had survived everything, and who had been delivered not to death but to a smaller life, was visible for the second it took the composure to reassert itself. Then the composure was back. She stood. She walked out of the Sept. Tywin watched her go. He said nothing. He had nothing to say. Stannis and Robb, the negotiation, the letters between King's Landing and River Run took 3 weeks. They were models of their respective writers' styles. Stannis's letters were short, dense. The specific written voice of a man who had been composing official documents his entire life, and who had refined the craft to its essential elements. stripping everything that was not the point until only the point remained. The Iron Throne is mine. I require your submission. Name your terms. Robb's letters were longer. Not verbose. The campaign had stripped his natural expansiveness, but with more room for the argument, the specific written voice of a young lord who had been forced to learn rhetoric through war, and who was still in the process of learning that the argument mattered less than the position. I have called myself king in the north, because the north has always been a separate kingdom, and because the cause that brought us south, my father's murder, has been addressed by the revelation that his killer's claim was fraudulent. I acknowledge your claim. I ask that you acknowledge mine. The north will be your loyal vassal. The north will not be your subordinate province. The fourth letter from King's Landing was different from the previous three. It was not from Stannis. It was from Davos. Lord Robb. I write without the king's knowledge, which means I'll be in significant trouble if he finds out, which means I'll keep this short. The king won't give you a kingdom. He'll die first. That is not posturing. That is his specific constitutional relationship with the concept of partial solutions. However, the king will give you something that functions like what you want without being called what you're calling it. I'd suggest negotiating for terms rather than titles. What specifically does the North need that it doesn't currently have? Answer that question and bring those answers rather than the crown. It's harder to refuse a list of practical concessions than it is to refuse a concept. This advice is free. I'll deny having given it. Davos Seaworth Robb read this letter to Catelyn. Catelyn read it twice. Do you know this man? Davos Seaworth. The Onion Knight. Stannis' closest advisor, a former smuggler, who was made a knight and a lord by Stannis when he was Lord of Dragonstone. Robb set the letter down. He's telling me how to negotiate with Stannis. Why? Because. Robb looked at the letter again. Because Davos Seaworth is a man who grew up in Flea Bottom and who was given everything he has by a man he believes in, and who wants that man's kingship to succeed. And Stannis' kingship succeeds better if the North submits than if it stays in the field. He's not helping me. He's helping Stannis by helping me help myself. Catelyn looked at her son. It's good advice, she said. It is. Robb picked up a quill. Write me a list. Everything the North needs that we can't get if we're in rebellion. Trade routes. The saltfish agreements. The passage through the neck. The specific, he was writing already. The list was forming. The wildling policy. The watch funding. The Northern Lord's exemptions that Robert let lapse. Catelyn wrote. They wrote for 2 hours. The letter that went south was not a declaration of submission. It was a document of requirements. The specific practical list of what the North needed from a central crown to function effectively, written in the flat language of administration rather than the elevated language of politics. Stannis read it. He read it, and he knew exactly what had happened. Davos's handwriting was recognizable, and Davos had clearly been in contact with the Stark Boy in a way that Stannis had not authorized. The not authorization produced the specific Stannis response, which was 3 seconds of directed fury at the invisible figure of his advisor, followed by the acknowledgement that the advice had been correct, followed by the practical decision to act on the advice, because being right was more important than being properly consulted. He wrote back, The North remains a kingdom of the 7 kingdoms. The Lord of Winterfell is the warden of the North. The practical accommodations you have listed are addressed as follows. There followed a line-by-line response to every item on the list. Most of them were accepted. 3 were modified. 2 were declined. The letter ended, I require your oath and your presence in King's Landing to give it. I require the disbanding of the army you have raised as a rebellion, not as a defense. I will not negotiate the military position. This is not a negotiation between powers. This is the terms by which a subject returns to the realm. The terms are generous. They will not improve with delay. Robb read this in the war tent. Grey Wind was outside, for once. The tent was too small for Grey Wind's current size, and the direwolf had been spending more time outside as the war progressed, and the wolf grew, and the tent didn't. He accepted almost everything, Catelyn said. He accepted almost everything, Robb agreed. The oath. In person, yes, he wants the public submission. The ceremony. He wants the thing that makes it real. The legal ceremony that turns the negotiated terms into the official position. Robb looked at the letter. I'd want the same thing. You're going to go. I'm going to go. Robb, I'm going to go, and I'm going to give the oath, and I'm going to bring the army home, and the North is going to be the North, not a kingdom, not a rebellion. The North. He folded the letter. That's enough. That's what we needed. Sansa and Arya are coming home. That's in the terms. It's the second item on the list. He held her gaze. I put it second, after the saltfish. Catelyn looked at her son. She thought, he is 17 years old, and he has been fighting a war for a year, and he hasn't lost a battle, and he is making the right decision, the hard-to-make decision, the stark decision that required surrendering the crown in exchange for the kingdom. Your father would be proud, she said. My father would say, you should have surrendered the crown the day Stannis won the throne. Robb almost smiled. Almost. He would be right. I should have. I was holding it because I didn't want to let go. He stood. The holding was expensive. Time to put it down. He sent the letter. The war in the south was over. The oath, King's Landing. 300-acre Robb Stark came to King's Landing in autumn. He came without an army. The army had been sent home, bannermen released to their castles and their harvests, and the specific domestic urgencies of northern life that war had been interrupting. He came with a retinue of 50 men, enough to be the escort of a lord, and not enough to be the vanguard of an invasion. He rode through the city gates. King's Landing was still King's Landing. The smell, the noise, the specific claustrophobic density of the city that was always disorienting to northerners who had grown up in the wide spaces where a man could see to the horizon in every direction. But it was different too. The banners were Baratheon black and gold. The gold cloaks were wearing something new on their arms, a specific insignia that Davos had designed. The flame of the Lord of Light combined with the Baratheon stag, the official cult symbol of a king whose faith was not his city's faith, but that was willing to coexist with the seven-pointed star. Robb noticed the banners. He noticed the flags and the city's state, better maintained than he'd expected. The streets cleaner, the food markets open and stocked with the Tyrrell grain that had been flowing steadily since Olenna had arranged the grain supply as her submission gift. The city was not happy. He could feel that, the specific atmospheric quality of a city that is functioning under constraint, that is orderly in the way that things are orderly when the disorder has been suppressed rather than resolved. But it was functional. It was alive. It was not burning. Stannis received him in the throne room. Robb had never been to King's Landing. He had grown up with his father's careful description of it. The heat, the smell, the politics, the specific collection of beautiful and rotten things that the city contained in equal measure. He had heard about the Iron Throne his entire life. He had not expected it to be ugly. It was very ugly. He knelt in front of it. The kneeling it cost him. He could feel it in his knees, which was absurd because the floor was stone, and the cost was not in the stone. The cost was in the act, in the specific physical symbol of a 16-year-old lord surrendering a claim that he had held for a year, and that had cost him men and time, and the specific childhood that you were supposed to have, but that you sometimes didn't, because the world required you to grow up before you were ready. I, Robb Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, swear fealty to Stannis of the House Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Andals and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm. His voice was even. He had practiced it. The evenness was the thing he was most proud of, because the evenness had required the most work. Stannis looked at him. Something in the look, not warmth. Stannis did not do warmth in throne rooms, but the specific Stannis acknowledgement, the recognition of a man who had held a thing and given it up cleanly, which Stannis respected, the way he respected all difficult things done correctly. Rise, Stannis said. Robb rose. Your father was an honest man, Stannis said. An honest man in a dishonest city. He paid for it. Yes. I intend to make the city less dishonest. The paying for it will be more evenly distributed. He looked at Robb. Your sisters are in the rooms below. They'll be brought to you. Something moved across Robb's face that was not suited for a formal reception, and that he could not prevent. The specific thing that happened when a person had been holding a fear for a long time, and the fear was suddenly, definitively, resolved. "Thank you," he said. "Thank the law," Stannis said. "The law says hostages are returned when the terms are met. The terms were met. The law operates." Davos, standing to the left of the throne, looked at his king. He said nothing. He thought, "Stannis, you old stone. You're kind. You won't say so. But you are." He thought, "That's going to be all right." Shireen. The princess arrives. Shireen came to King's Landing 5 weeks after the city fell. She came because Stannis sent for her. Not immediately, not on the first day, but after the city was under sufficient control that a child could travel from Dragonstone to the capital without the specific dangers of a city still processing occupation. She came with Selise and a retinue, and Patchface, who had been her companion since before she could remember, and whose riddles she had long since catalogued. The city saw her from the walls. 9 years old. The grey-green grayscale scars on the left side of her face, the permanent mark of the sickness she'd survived, the illness that maesters had expected to kill her, and that had instead killed parts of her face and left the rest. She sat on her horse with the specific straight-backed posture of a girl who had been taught to ride correctly, and who had taken the teaching seriously, because the horse was one of the few things she'd been allowed to do outside Dragonstone's walls. The city looked at her. The city had complicated feelings about the grayscale. King's Landing had learned to fear grayscale with the specific urban fear of a city, where disease spread through the water, and the markets, and the 1,000 points of human contact that city life required. Grayscale in a city could mean, the city knew what grayscale in a city could mean. But she was 9, and she was the king's daughter. And the grayscale was old, stable, contained. The specific arrested state that meant it had stopped spreading years ago and would not spread further. The city looked at her and made its assessment. Stannis received her in the yard. He was not demonstrative. Stannis and demonstrative had the same complicated relationship that Stannis and most emotional expressions had. But he took her hand when she dismounted, and the taking was the Stannis version of an embrace, and Shireen knew this and accepted it with the specific Shireen grace of a daughter who had been reading her father's emotional vocabulary since she was old enough to understand that the vocabulary was constrained and that the constraint was not the absence of feeling, but the absence of expression. "Father," she said. "You look well," he said. "I look the same," she said. "I always look the same." "Then you look the same as you did." "Which is well." He walked her inside. Not the throne room, his study. The room where he worked, where the papers were, and the audit was, and the specific chaos of a man managing a realm who had not yet found all the things that needed managing. How was the journey? Long. The ship smelled bad. Patchface sang riddles for 4 hours, and when he ran out of riddles, he invented new ones. She looked at the papers on the desk. "You're very busy. A kingdom generates paperwork. I could help. With the paperwork." She looked at him. The Shireen gaze, the direct, undecorated assessment of a child who had grown up in relative isolation, and who had compensated by reading everything available, and who had developed a mind that operated at speeds that surprised most adults who spoke to her. "I've been reading about governance while we were waiting at Dragonstone. Maester Cresson left very complete records." Stannis looked at his daughter. He thought, "She is 9. She has grayscale scars on her face. She has been isolated at Dragonstone for most of her life. She has spent the year of the war waiting while her father fought for a throne that would have been hers, eventually." He thought, "She's the one I should have brought sooner." "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll review the Northern grain accounts together. You can tell me what you notice." Her face. The scarred side and the unscarred side both doing the same thing. A smile that was not performed for his benefit, but that happened because the offering was real, and the real was recognized. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." Selise in the doorway. watched her husband and her daughter bend over the desk together as Stannis pulled out the first of the northern accounts. She watched for a long moment. She said nothing. She went to pray. The girls. Sansa and Arya. Sansa came down the stairs first. She was 12. She had grown during the months of captivity, not just in height, in the specific vertical dimension that 12-year-olds grew when they were not paying attention, but in the other dimension, the one that had nothing to do with height. She was wearing a blue dress that was not hers. It had been found in the Red Keep stores when she'd been moved from Lannister custody to Stannis's, and that fit her approximately. Her hair was braided in the Lannister style. That was going to change. She saw Robb at the bottom of the stairs and stopped. For 1 second, she stood on the stairs and her face did nothing. The specific control of a girl who had spent months at a Lannister court where faces that showed things were punished for showing them. Then the control broke. She came down the stairs in 2 steps and into Robb's arms, and the specific sound that she made was not the sound of a 12-year-old girl crying. It was the sound of a person who had been holding something for a very long time, and who had finally put it down. Robb held her. He did not say it was all right. He did not say she was safe. He held her, and his face was doing something that was not appropriate for the throne room anteroom where they were standing, and that he was not managing because there are limits to what management can ask of a person. Arya came down the stairs 4 minutes later. She was 10. She was wearing the wrong size clothes. She had a bruise above her left eye that was turning yellow at the edges, which meant it was old enough to be from before Stannis' men had taken custody of her. She came down the stairs the way she did everything, with momentum, as if standing still was an affront to physics. She hit Robb with both arms, and the impact was visible. "Where were you?" she said, into his shoulder. "Where were you? Where were you? Where were you?" "I'm here," he said. "You took so long. You took so long." "I know. I'm sorry." His voice was broken, and he wasn't managing it, and nobody in the room was going to pretend that managing it was appropriate. "I'm here. I'm here." Arya pulled back, looked at him. Her face was dry. She didn't cry, Arya, or she didn't cry, in the way that was visible. Whatever she was doing with the feelings happened somewhere else. She looked at him with the specific Arya gaze that was part wolf and part assessment. "Joffrey," she said. "What's happening to Joffrey?" "He's being tried. He killed father. He made me watch." "I know. He killed Septa Mordain and the guards, and—" "I know, Arya." His hand on the back of her head. The brother gesture. "The trial will be what it is. There are other things first. The first thing is, you're coming home." "To Winterfell?" He paused. Just. The Robb pause that wasn't hesitation but the specific recalibration of a man who was about to say something difficult to someone who had had enough. Difficult. "Winterfell is. We'll talk about Winterfell on the road." He held her gaze. "But yes, north. Home. Whatever home means when we get there." Arya looked at him. She did the arithmetic he wasn't saying, in the specific Arya way that was faster than it should have been for a 10-year-old, and that had gotten faster over a year of surviving a hostile court. "Theon," she said. "Theon." "Yes." "Is he dead?" "Theon is." Robb started. "We'll talk on the road." Arya looked at her brother, at the face that was their father's face, the grey, stark eyes, the jaw that was set the same way Ned's jaw had set, when he was telling you something you didn't want to hear. "That bad?" she said. Not a question. "That bad?" Robb said. "I'll fix it. I'll fix it as much as it can be fixed." She nodded. Then she held on again. Not with the momentum this time, with the specific quiet holding of someone who has run out of things to say and who is communicating through the physical because the physical is more honest. Sansa watched this. Sansa, with her Lannister braid and her court manner, and her 12-year-old eyes that had spent a year in one of the most politically dangerous places in the world, and that had emerged seeing things those eyes should not have had to see. Sansa watched her sister hold her brother, and she thought, "We're still here." She thought, "We're all still here." She put her hand on Robb's arm. He covered it with his. The three of them stood in the anteroom of the Red Keep in the city that had killed their father, and that was now the city of a different king. And they were together. And together was the thing that had been missing for a year, and that was, in this moment, in this room, restored. Not repaired. Restored. Different from how it had been. Everything was different from how it had been. But present. Breathing. Real. Tywin and Tyrion. The meeting that wasn't. Tywin came to the Red Keep on the 5th day, and Tyrion was not at the gate to receive him. This was deliberate. Not out of spite. Tyrion had moved past spite, or told himself he had, which was not the same thing, but was close enough for functional purposes. It was deliberate because Tyrion had calculated that the first meeting between himself and his father, after the specific events of the past months, was a meeting that should not have any witnesses, and that should not occur in a space that either man would read as the other's home territory. He sent Bronn. Bronn had survived the Blackwater because Bronn survived everything, having developed over decades of sellsword work, the specific talent for being the least important person in any room when the room was about to become dangerous. Bronn had found Tyrion in the dungeon, and Bronn had been the first person to tell him, with the specific Bronn economy of expression, that his face was going to be interesting. "Your father's here," Bronn said. "I know." "You're not going to the gate." "I'm not going to the gate." Bronn looked at him with the assessment that was Bronn's version of concern, which was evaluating whether the situation was going to cost him something. The new king doesn't know, and won't unless you tell him. Tyrion looked at him. "Tell him." "I wasn't planning to." Bronn sat on the edge of the desk. "You're going to have to talk to your father eventually." Eventually is a very large word. It can hold almost anything. He submitted. His daughter is in the Maiden Vault. His grandson is on trial. He bent the knee to a man he spent 2 years trying to keep off the throne. That's, even for Tywin Lannister, that's a cost. It is. And you're going to let him feel it for a bit before you. I'm going to let him feel it for exactly as long as it takes for me to figure out what I want from the conversation. Tyrion was at the window. The city below, the specific King's Landing view from the Red Keep that he had been seeing his whole life. And that was now filtered through the understanding that the city's governance had changed, and that the change had happened partly because of him. He let me sit in a dungeon for weeks. He was negotiating. He was calculating. There's a difference. Calculating doesn't require sentiment. Negotiating involves at least the performance of it. He turned. He sent no word, no message, no assurance, nothing. He arrived at the gates on his own schedule for his own reasons, and the reasons were family in the specific way that Tywin Lannister means family, which is assets and liabilities and the positioning of one against the other. Bronn said nothing. He had a specific gift for silence at moments when silence was the appropriate response. "I'll meet him," Tyrion said. "Tomorrow. In the market. Not in the castle." "Why the market?" "Because in the market neither of us is home." He looked at the window. "And because I want to look at him in a place where he can see what the city looks like without his family on the throne. The city should be educational for him." Tywin, when Bronn passed him the message, read it with his face doing nothing. He came to the market. They met at a stall that sold honey cakes, Tyrion's specific choice, carrying the specific meaning of a man choosing a childish food for a meeting with his father in a deliberate act of either comfort or mockery. Tywin ate nothing. Tyrion ate 2 honey cakes and watched his father watch the market. "You look smaller," Tyrion said. "You look injured." "I am injured. Someone tried to kill me during the battle. One of Cersei's men." "I know." "Do you?" "I know most things." Tywin looked at him. "You cooperated with Stannis." "I was helpful. In the specific ways that were available to me." Tyrion ate the second honey cake. "The city is better run than it was under my administration. The books are balanced. The debt is being paid. The governance is rigid, but functional." He has no political sense. He has Davos Seaworth, who has the political sense that Stannis lacks, and who applies it on Stannis' behalf. The combination is effective. He looked at his father. "You're going to say you could do it better?" I could. You could. And you made the offer, and he considered it, and he declined it. Tyrion held the gaze. How does it feel? Tywin said nothing. Being on the outside. Having the ability and not the position. Being consulted and then overruled. He kept looking at his father. I've been on the outside my whole life. I am curious what it feels like from a different starting point. This conversation, Tywin said, is not useful. This conversation is the most honest one we've ever had. Tyrion set down the honey cake wrapper. You left me in a dungeon. You didn't know if I'd live. You didn't send word. I knew you'd live. You're difficult to kill. That's not. Tyrion stopped, started. That's not the point, and you know it. The point, Tywin said, is that the situation required managing, and I managed it in the order that the order required. Your welfare was a variable, I know. I am always a variable in your calculations. A factor, sometimes a useful one, often an embarrassing one. Never. He stopped. He was not going to say the word. The word was there. The word that he had been not saying his entire life in conversations with his father. The word that lived in the space between what Tywin gave and what Tyrion had needed. He said, never a son. Tywin looked at him. The silence between them was the length of 45 years. You are a Lannister, Tywin said. What you've done here, the defense, the cooperation with the new regime, the assistance with the transition, that is Lannister. That is what the name means when it functions correctly. I know. Tyrion stood. That's the closest you'll ever come to saying something kind, and I'll take it. He looked at his father. The hand position is closed. Stannis won't appoint you. I told him why, and he agreed with the why. And you should know that I was the one who explained it to him. You undermined. I advised honestly. He made the decision. That's what I do now. Tyrion looked at the market, at the city, at King's Landing in the autumn light, functioning, imperfect, alive. Go home, father, to the Rock, run the Westerlands, pay the crown debt. Be what you're good at being. He paused. We are still Lannisters. The name still means something. Let's not waste what's left of it. He walked away. Tywin watched him go. He stood in the market for a long time. He ate nothing. Then he went back to the Red Keep, and he began the process of returning to Casterly Rock, which was the only thing available to him, and which he would do, as he did all things, correctly and without sentimentality. Joffrey. What the law produced. The trial of Joffrey Waters, which was what the court now called him. The name of the bastard's bastard status. The Waters name that bastards in the Crownlands received the way northern bastards received snow, was the most watched proceeding in King's Landing since the Targaryens fell. The city crowded the streets around the Sept. Not because they loved Stannis. The city's complicated feelings about Stannis had not resolved into love in the month since the battle, but because the proceedings were the specific kind of public spectacle that 500,000 people had an instinct for. The trial of a king's son, the public dismantling of the claim that had been the legal fiction of the past year's governance. Joffrey sat in the defendant's chair with the expression of a 13-year-old who had rehearsed contempt and was finding that contempt was harder to maintain when the room contained no one who was afraid of him. He had been difficult. This was the consensus among everyone who had interacted with him during the weeks of confinement, Stannis' guards, the maester assigned to him, the servants who brought his food. Difficult in the specific way that people were difficult when they had been powerful, and who found the removal of the power more intolerable than any physical privation. He had broken things. He had screamed at the guards. He had sent Tommen away from their shared chamber in a rage that had lasted 3 days, and that had produced the specific bruise on Tommen's arm that Stannis had documented when the guards reported it. The documentation was now part of the evidence. The charges against Joffrey Waters were not the charges against Cersei. Cersei's charges were about origin and parentage. Joffrey's charges were about what he had done with the power he'd held fraudulently. The specific list of orders, decisions, and acts that fell under the heading of what a bastard pretending to be king could be held accountable for. Ned Stark's execution headed the list. This was Tyrion's contribution to the Joffrey case, specifically. He had brought the Pycelle correspondence for the Cersei trial. He had brought the evidence for the Stark charge against Joffrey, the specific documentation of an order given by a 13-year-old boy in the Sept of Baelor, against the counsel of his hand, against the terms of an announced agreement, against the law's provision for mercy in cases of confessed traitors. The order was in writing. A clerk's record of a royal command. The body count, Ned Stark's head, which had been on a spike long enough for it to become a political symbol and then a political embarrassment, confirmed the order's execution. Joffrey denied it. He denied it in the specific way that Joffrey denied things, which was, loudly, with references to his own authority, with no evidence. With the conviction of a boy who had been taught that the king's word was the law and that what the king said had happened was what had happened. The court had spent a year dismantling that conviction, one decision at a time. The verdict, guilty. On the execution charge. On the charge of torturing prisoners, documented. On the charge of ordering the purge of Robert's bastards, documented. The sentence was the difficult part. Stannis sat in the sept and looked at Joffrey Waters and thought about the law. The law was clear. The charges, properly adjudicated, carried the death sentence. He had applied it to others. He would apply it consistently, or the law was not law, it was preference, applied when convenient and set aside when politically complex. He was not willing to apply the law as preference. He was also looking at a 13-year-old boy. Not the crimes, not the king. The 13-year-old boy who was sitting in the defendant's chair and who was, underneath the contempt and the performed bravery, frightened in the specific way that 13-year-old boys were frightened when they were finally, inescapably confronted with consequences. Stannis had a daughter. Shireen was 9. He had not seen her in months. She was at Dragonstone, with Selyse, the specific quarantine of a child whose face carried the scars of grayscale, and who was therefore kept from court, not out of shame, not really, but out of the specific parental helplessness of not knowing what to do with a daughter who was brilliant and isolated and sick. He looked at Joffrey. He thought, this boy is not my daughter. This boy ordered the death of a good man. This boy tortured prisoners for entertainment. This boy is 13 years old, and he is also a monster, and the monster and the 13-year-old are the same person. He thought, what does the law require? The law required death. He thought, what does justice require? He did not know. He had been ruling for 3 months, and in 3 months he had learned that ruling was not the application of law to situations. Ruling was the specific agonizing process of finding the place where law and human reality intersected, and trying to do the right thing in the intersection. He had not expected it to be this hard. He had expected it to be hard in the ways that war was hard, the specific physical, tactical hardness of battles and sieges and the management of armies. Not this. Not a 13-year-old boy in a chair who had done terrible things and who was also terrible in the way that human beings were sometimes terrible when they were given power before they understood what power meant. He announced the sentence. Not death. Confinement until his majority. At that time, review. The law's death sentence deferred to the specific provision that allowed for age to be considered as a mitigating factor in capital cases. It was not a provision he had used before. It was in the law. He was using it. The city outside the sept heard the sentence. The city was not satisfied. The city wanted blood. King's Landing always wanted blood when it was in the mood for blood, and the year of Joffrey had put it in the mood. The sentence was not blood. The sentence was law, applied with the specific Stannis consistency that was both his greatest quality and his least crowd-pleasing one. Davos heard the sentence. He thought, Stannis. He thought, you did the right thing. Again. In the way that made you look weak to people who don't understand what strength actually costs. He thought, he's going to be all right. He's not going to be good at this in the way that kings are usually good at it. But he's going to be right. He thought, that's enough. Margaery, what the Tyrell played. Margaery Tyrell arrived in King's Landing 6 weeks after the battle. She came with her father and her grandmother, and the specific Tyrell retinue that communicated, through the number and quality of its members, the message, we are powerful enough to bring this many people, and we are secure enough to bring them without military threat. The retinue was exactly large enough to be impressive, and exactly small enough to be unthreatening. Olenna had calibrated it, She walked through the city with the specific quality that Marguerite Tyrell had cultivated for 3 years. The warmth, the engagement, the stopping to speak with the small folk, the genuine, or genuine seeming. The performance was indistinguishable from the real by any available external measure. Interest in the people she met, and the lives they led, and the problems they had. The city noticed. The city that had been sullen about Stannis was not sullen about Marguerite. The city could not be sullen about Marguerite, because Marguerite was skilled at the specific art of being impossible to be sullen about. Davos watched this from the wall. He watched Marguerite Tyrell walk through the flea-bottom streets with a basket of bread that she had arranged to have provided, and that she was personally distributing with the specific performance of generosity that was both genuine and calculated. And he thought, this woman is dangerous. Not to Stannis. Stannis was not vulnerable to the specific thing Marguerite was offering, but to the political arrangement that Stannis was building. Because the political arrangement needed the city's tolerance, and Marguerite was capable of producing something much more powerful than tolerance. He went to Stannis. The Tyrell girl is in Flea Bottom, he said. I know. She's distributing bread. I know. The city is receiving it, warmly. Davos sat. More warmly than the city has received anything from the crown in 3 months. Stannis looked at him. You're going to tell me to use her. I'm going to tell you she's already using herself, and the question is whether you make the arrangement formal or you let her operate independently, which is worse. She wants something. She wants the same thing her grandmother arranged the grain supply to get. A position, a formal alliance. The Tyrell connection to the crown made visible and useful for both sides. Davos held the gaze. There's a simple version. I have a queen. I know. That's not the simple version. He paused. Your heir. Stannis was still. Selyse can't. He stopped. The specific Stannis stopped at the word Selyse. The word that contained everything that was complicated between Stannis and his marriage. The faith, the childbirth history, the specific dynamic of a couple who were aligned in their beliefs and misaligned in their temperaments, and who had produced one child, Shireen, and who had not produced others. Tommen, Davos said. Stannis looked at him. Tommen is 8. He's not your blood, I know. But he's Cersei's boy, and not Joffrey, and everyone who meets him reports back the same thing. He's kind. He's gentle. He cries when animals are hurt. Davos spread his hands. You have an heir problem. You have a city problem. Marguerite Tyrell, walking through Flea Bottom with bread, is a solution to the city problem. Tommen is, potentially, a solution to the heir problem if you decide he's worth the political move. Tommen is a bastard. Tommen is a bastard by blood. Whether he remains so is a legal question. Legal. The same law that made him a bastard can, under the right conditions, with the right precedent, legitimize him under a different house. House Lannister wants no part of him, given the trial. House Baratheon is available. He let the thought sit. I'm not recommending this. I'm noting the possibility. Stannis was quiet for a long time. If I legitimize Tommen as a Baratheon, you convert a political liability into an heir. You give the Lannister connection a face that is not Cersei's face. You give the city a child they can be fond of, and the North a king who has no personal grudges. Davos paused. Tywin Lannister will hate it. That's a point in its favor. It is, Davos said. The Tyrell marriage would be Margaery's second betrothal. First Renly, then Joffrey, now Tommen. The Tyrells are committed to the throne. The specific throne. Whoever's on it. I don't trust them. You don't need to trust them. You need them to need you. That's different. Trust is for Davos Seaworth and people like him. The Tyrells don't trust either, they calculate. As long as the calculation keeps going your way, they'll keep going your way. Stannis drummed his fingers on the desk. He said, arrange a meeting with the grandmother. Not the girl. The grandmother is the one I'm actually negotiating with. Davos nodded. He stood to leave. Davos? Yes. About Tommen. Before I decide, how is he? The words came out with the specific Stannis difficulty of a man asking a question whose answer mattered personally, and who was uncomfortable with the mattering. The boy, frightened, confused, 8 years old, and his mother has been confined, and his brother is on trial, and everything he understood about his life is gone. Davos held the gaze. But kind. What the reports say. Genuinely kind. Without the performance. Stannis was quiet. See that he has a decent maester, he said. And better food. The confinement food is... He stopped. Better food, Davos said. Yes, your grace. He left with the specific feeling he had when Stannis did the human thing. The thing underneath the law and the principle and the stone face. The feeling that was not surprise. Not anymore, but satisfaction. The feeling of watching someone be the person they were under the person they showed. Melisandre, the Red Faith, the city, the Lord of Light Temple opened in the 3rd month. Not the Great Temple. There was no Great Temple. Melisandre had not proposed one. She had proposed a modest building near the harbour, a converted warehouse that had been cleaned and lit with 100 fires, and that contained, in its converted interior, the specific warmth of a place devoted to fire, and to the god who was the fire. The city received this with the specific King's Landing mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The city worshipped the Seven, or it said it did. The temples were patronized with the specific obligatory frequency that urban faith required, and that expressed itself more in the keeping of holidays than in any deep theological commitment. A new faith was interesting the way new things were interesting. The conversions were slow, then not slow. The fishermen and the sailors came first, the people whose work put them near the water and near the fires, and who had specific practical reasons to find meaning in a religion that organized itself around light in the darkness. Then the dock workers, then the people of Flea Bottom, who had more reasons than most to want a god who promised that the darkness would not win. Davos watched this with the specific Davos complicated feeling. He had lost his son to this faith. Mathos had believed and had died. The believing had not protected him. This was the core of Davos's problem with the faith. Not the theology. He had no strong theology of his own, but the specific empirical failure of a god whose followers were not demonstrably better protected than anyone else. He went to the temple, not to worship, to observe. He went, and he sat in the back, and he watched a dozen people sit in the warmth of the fires and listen to Melisandre speak. She was good at this, the speaking, the specific quality of a preacher who had been preaching in different languages in different countries for 20 years, and who had developed the craft. She spoke about the darkness, about what the darkness was, about what was coming from beyond the wall, which was known now, publicly, through the ravens that had come south, and that Stannis had made no attempt to suppress. She spoke about what the Lord of Light would do when the darkness came. Davos sat in the back. He thought about Mathos. He thought, my son believed in this. My son died believing in this. My son would be here, in this temple, listening to this woman, and the listening would be genuine for him in a way that it is not for me. He thought, maybe that's enough. Maybe the believing is the thing, regardless of whether the thing believed is real. Maybe what the city needs is what my son had, the specific warmth of a faith that says the dark is real, but the light is more real. He thought, I still don't trust her. But I don't trust many people, and the ones I trust are the ones I've tested. And she's being tested now, in the city, in the temple, with the small people, and the real needs, and the specific, unglamorous work of a faith that wants to be more than shadow babies and fire prophecies. He left before the service ended. He thought about Mathos on the way out. He thought, I hope you can see this, boy. I hope wherever you are, you can see that what you believed in is being built into something. He thought, I hope it's worth what it cost. He put the thought away. He went to work. Sillies. What the Queen held sillies. Florent Baratheon had waited 18 months for her husband to win. She had prayed. She had fasted. She had maintained the fires in the throne room at Dragonstone with the specific devoted constancy of a woman whose faith was the most real thing in her life, and who had converted every trial into evidence that the faith was producing results. She had been right. The fire had spoken. The Lord of Light had delivered. Stannis had won. She had expected to feel differently. The victory had arrived as a raven, then as a succession of ravens, and she had read each one in the solar at Dragonstone with her hands folded and her eyes dry, because this was what she had prayed for, and Selyse did not cry when prayers were answered. She had held the last raven and felt the faith warm in her chest, confirmed. The Lord of Light had delivered. And then, nothing else. She came to King's Landing, and King's Landing was the city her husband had won, and that he was now governing, and that she found on first encounter, and on second and on third, impossible to connect with. Not foreign, she had grown up at court. She knew the city. She had spent years here as the wife of the Lord of Dragonstone when he served on the small council. She knew King's Landing. But the city didn't know what to do with her, and she didn't know what to do with the city, and the specific social architecture of being the queen was larger than she had understood. Being queen was not being right. Being queen was being needed by 500,000 people in ways that had nothing to do with whether the Lord of Light had ordained your husband's victory. She went to Melisandre, not as a supplicant, as a colleague. The specific relationship between Selyse and Melisandre was not the relationship that the court assumed, which was devotee and prophet, follower and leader. It was peer faith, the specific quality of two women who had both organized their inner lives around the Lord of Light, and who were now occupying adjacent positions in a kingdom that the Lord had delivered and that required more than faith to govern. "He's distracted," Selyse said. She was in Melisandre's rooms, Cersei's old solar, still. Melisandre had made small changes to it, the fires, always the fires, 3 of them burning in a room that was warm, in a way that Selyse found comforting, and Stannis found excessive. "He's governing," Melisandre said. "He's governing and he's not." Selyse stopped, chose words. Selyse was not always careful with words. She said what she meant with the specific bluntness of a woman who had been educated to be clear rather than to be politic. "He's not here. He's in the accounts and the letters and the city watch reports. He is physically present in the Red Keep, and he is effectively somewhere else. That is what rulership is. I know what rulership is. I watched him prepare for it for 2 years. I am not asking for his attention. I am asking," she held Melisandre's gaze, "I am asking whether the kingdom takes the man, whether what we fought for is worth what it costs him." Melisandre looked at her, the 2 women, the queen and the priestess, the true believer and the instrument, the faith and the fire. "He is doing what the Lord requires," Melisandre said. "He's doing what any competent man with principles would do." Selyse's voice wasn't unkind, but it was direct in the way that Selyse was always direct. "The Lord of Light won the battle for him. What Stannis is doing with the kingdom is Stannis, not the Lord, Stannis. Is there a difference? There is always a difference. The Lord provides the means. The man provides the character. Stannis's character is..." She looked at the fire. "He is doing it correctly. I know that. I see the accounts and the letters and the governance, and he is doing it correctly. I wanted to ask you..." She paused. "Is it enough? Will it be enough? The Lord of Light shows you things in the fire. Can you tell me whether it is enough?" Melisandre looked into the fire. She looked for a long time. "The darkness is coming," she said. "From the north. You know this. I know this. When the darkness comes, what is needed is not warmth. It is not love. It is not the specific things that queens were usually valued for." She looked at Selyse. "What is needed is a king who will do what is required without flinching, who will apply the law, who will maintain the defense, who will send men to the wall and fund the watch and believe the ravens when the ravens say the dead are walking." "Stannis," Selyse said. "Stannis." Selyse sat with this. She sat with it the way she sat with hard things, through them rather than around them. "He needs to send for Shireen." "He already has." "Good." She stood. "She's better with him than I am. She speaks his language. The language of governance. The language of, I don't know what to call it, The language of people who say exactly what they mean and mean exactly what they say, and who find the gap between the two intolerable. She looked at the door. It is a difficult language to learn when you were not raised in it. You believe in him, Melisandre said. I have always believed in him. Celise held her gaze. That has never been the question. She went to her rooms. She prayed. The fires burned what the kingdom became. 301 AC. A year after the battle, the realm had a shape. Not the shape it had been. Not Robert's realm. The specific, chaotic, warm mess of a kingdom governed by a man who loved it and couldn't run it, held together by the specific gravity of a man who was impossible not to love and who was unsuited for everything that loving was supposed to get you. That realm was gone. Not the realm that Cersei had tried to maintain. The golden fiction. The performance of power built on a secret that everyone suspected and nobody could prove until they could. That realm was gone too. Its secret exposed. Its fiction burned in the Sept of Baelor, with 7 judges watching. The new realm was Stannis' realm, which was different in the specific ways that Stannis was different. It was governed. Not brilliantly. Stannis was not a brilliant governor, he was a rigorous one, and rigor and brilliance were different qualities that produced different results. Rigor produced a crown that paid its debts on a schedule that Tyrion had designed and that Tywin had reluctantly endorsed. Rigor produced a city watch that was corrupt in the normal ways cities were corrupt, rather than in the spectacular ways that Joffrey's city had been corrupt. Rigor produced courts that were not entirely fair, but that were trying to be fair, which was further than courts had gotten in a generation. The Tayrells were embedded. Olenna had met with Stannis twice, and the meetings had been the specific experience that Stannis later described to Davos as the first time I've ever been in a conversation with someone who was simultaneously helping me and stealing from me. And I couldn't figure out where the boundary was. Davos had told him that was because Olenna was doing it correctly. Tommen had been legitimized as Tommen Baratheon and betrothed to Margaery, the specific transaction that gave the Tyrells the future queen they'd been working toward since Joffrey's betrothal. And that gave Stannis the heir his bloodline could not provide, and the city connection that his personality could not provide. The North was a peace. Robb Stark had given the oath and gone home, and the going home had been the specific, complicated return of a lord to a castle that was not intact. Winterfell stood, barely, the damage that Theon had done, in his brief and catastrophic seizure of it, being repaired slowly. The bones of the place standing while the flesh was rebuilt. The North was doing what the North did, enduring. The Tully family had been returned to Riverrun with Edmure as lord. The specific, quiet restorations of a Riverlands that needed stability more than it needed justice. The Wall got men. This was Davos's contribution, his specific ongoing project of pushing Stannis to take the Watch's requests seriously. 5,000 men, in addition to the Watch's existing strength, deployed from the realm's various armies into the Black Cloak. Not volunteers, assigned. The specific Stannis method of solving a staffing problem. Assign people to it and require them to go. The Night King was not concerned with the realm's political situation. The cold was building. The dead were walking. The Wall was receiving reports that Davos read with the specific feeling of a man who had heard the word winter used as an abstraction his entire life, and who was beginning to understand that the abstraction was coming for him personally. But that was the next war. This one was over. Stannis, alone. What ruling felt like. He sat on the Iron Throne at midnight, not performing, not receiving. Alone, his guards outside the throne room door, the room empty, the candles burning low and filling the space with the specific amber dimness of a room in which important things happened during the day, and that at midnight was just a room with an uncomfortable chair. He sat and he thought about the year, the battle, Mathos Seaworth's death, Davos coming ashore, the city, the audit, Tywin at the gate, Cersei in the trial, Robb kneeling, the Tyrell girl in Flea Bottom, the temple opening, Tommen betrothed, Joffrey confined. He had not become a good king. He had not become what good kings were. He had never had the illusion that he would, that the throne would somehow produce in him the warmth and the charisma and the specific human accessibility that Robert had had. And that was, in retrospect, the only thing Robert had had that couldn't be dismissed as waste or excess. The people did not love him. The lords respected him in the grudging way that lords respected competence when competence was unavoidable. He was doing the work. That was what he had. The work done correctly. The law applied consistently. The accounts balanced. The debts paid. The justice administered. The wall manned. He had Davos. Who was the person in the world who understood him best and who had not been destroyed by the understanding and who came back every morning to do the work alongside him, which was, Stannis thought, the definition of loyalty that mattered? He had not Melisandre. He had Melisandre's presence and Melisandre's advice and the specific, complicated resource of a woman whose faith was not his and whose methods he did not always endorse and who was building something in the city that might be useful and might not be, and that he could not evaluate because his God was the Lord of Light, and he wasn't sure he believed in any Lord, and the not being sure was its own form of worship maybe. He wasn't sure about that either. He had a kingdom. Not the kingdom he'd wanted. No one who took a throne by force got the kingdom they'd wanted, because the wanting was abstract, and the kingdom was specific. The specific, cold management of 500,000 people's needs, 2,000 miles of coastline, a dozen great lords with interests that only occasionally aligned with the crown's, a city that would never love him, and that he would govern for its own good, whether it wanted governance or not. He sat on the Iron Throne. The throne was uncomfortable. He had never found it otherwise. It cut you if you weren't careful, and it was cold in winter, and it was symbolically loaded in ways that were exhausting, and that required constant management. He sat in it anyway, because it was his, because the law said it was his, and the battle said it was his, and the year of work said it was his, in the specific way that things were yours when you had bled for them and struggled for them and sat in them at midnight alone and thought about what they cost and decided the cost was worth it. He sat. He thought. He got up. He went to his desk. He worked. What if Stannis Baratheon won the Battle of the Blackwater? He kept the throne. That's the first thing. He came through the gate, and he took the castle, and he sat in the chair that cuts, and he kept it, through law and rigor, and the specific grinding daily work of governance that nobody writes songs about, and that kept the realm from burning down. The battle was the easy part. Cersei was tried. Joffrey was tried. The legal architecture of what had been done, the fraud, the murders, the specific constitutional crime of presenting bastards as heirs, was adjudicated through the process that Stannis had always insisted was the only legitimate process, and that had taken 18 months of war to reach. The North submitted, not joyfully, not without negotiation. But Robb Stark came to King's Landing and knelt and gave the oath and went home to rebuild Winterfell, and the specific armed rebellion that had been the War of the Five Kings reduced itself, over weeks and months, to the political arrangement that was always its most sustainable resolution. The Tyrells calculated and submitted on favourable terms. Tywin submitted and hated it. The realm's lords looked at the situation and made the arithmetic work and bent the knee, because the alternative to bending the knee was fighting a man who had just won the most impregnable city in Westeros, and who showed every indication of being willing to fight until the fight resolved in his favour. Davos mourned his son and came back to work. Tyrion survived and found himself useful in the specific way that inconvenient truths were useful, as the person who could say the thing nobody wanted to say, to the person nobody could say it to. Melisandre built her temple, and watched her fires, and kept her counsel, and whatever she saw in the flames, she kept mostly to herself, which was either wisdom or the preparation for something that hadn't yet arrived. The city ate Tyrell bread. The north endured northern winter. The wall received its men and its supplies, and began, for the first time in a generation, to function as the wall was supposed to function. And Stannis Baratheon sat on the Iron Throne, and was not loved, and was not warm, and was not Robert, and was not what the songs described when they described kings, and was the thing that the songs almost never described when they described kings, which was present, accountable, doing the work. Not a great king, A good one. The distinction was everything.